our over 1,200 employees, and our 22,000 students. It's my pleasure to welcome you this morning to the campus of Suffolk County Community College. Absolutely. The mission of SUNY Suffolk, yes, we are part of the SUNY system, as well as part of the great county of Suffolk, is to provide outstanding educational opportunities that serve our region's students and families and the entire community. And so when we come together on a day like today to think about best practices, to think about what our community needs, to teach and learn from each other, that is wholly in keeping with the mission of Suffolk County Community College. We're an institution of higher education, just like any college or university, and so we stand for academic excellence. We stand for student success. We stand for delivering the highest levels of training to all of our workforce partners, whether they are private employers, whether they are local government, whether they are nonprofit and social service organizations. We stand for being sure that we meet the needs of those employers and, by extension, the needs of our community. And as a community college, we're also focused on the most pressing issues that face our community. So when we come together today to talk about social services, services for children and families, the intersection of criminal justice and social services, how to support folks who are involved in any way, who have special needs with family services or criminal justice, we're also fulfilling the mission of Suffolk County Community College. Part of what's on our logo is the lighthouse. And so for many generations of students, Suffolk Community College has been a beacon of learning, a beacon that helps them start their academic and professional careers. Who here today spent some time attending Suffolk County Community College? Wonderful. Isn't that something? My hope today is that the college will continue to be a beacon for all of you through events like this. It's my honor to stand here today with you, with all of the elected representatives and other folks who are here today to represent social services. And so once again, on behalf of all of our employees, our students, on behalf of the entire college community, welcome and have a great day.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Farnham, and I'm so happy to be here today. For those of you that don't know me, I am the lead counselor for Eastern Suffolk BOCES, where I work with close to 85 social workers. And together we identify trends and concerns that we might see, and I bring that back to various county boards and task forces that I sit on. As part of that, I have become the chair of the Suffolk County Advisory Board on Child Protection Services. And I'm really excited about the work that we're about ready to do here today, and to have everyone here in one space to focus in on how we can work on collaborating, to come together to transform lives, and to work on bettering the communication and network and collaboration with each other. I want to start off with a special thanks to the Suffolk County PBA and the Asian Jade Society for their sponsoring of our breakfast, our delicious, plentiful breakfast that we have. And to thank the County Executive, Ed Romaine, for his strong commitment to helping address the issues that affect so many of our roles in protecting children. I'd also like to thank the members of the Suffolk County Advisory Board for their devotion to protecting the children of Suffolk County. It is a blessing to have you all in my life. And I want to give a special thanks to the subcommittee of amazing, smart, and passionate individuals who put today's conference together. Dr. Sylvia Diaz, the Deputy County Executive for Health, Human Services, and Education. Dr. John Imhoff, the Commissioner of the Department of Social Services. Annie O, the Chief Counsel for the Department of Social Services. Faith Lavelle, the Bureau Chief for Family Court and Social Services Bureau. Annette Mahoney-Cross, the Assistant Divisional Administrator for Suffolk County Department of Social Services, and Dr. Diana Filiano, the Director of Child Welfare Training Programs for Stony Brook University. And a very special thanks to Kristen McKay, the Assistant Deputy County Executive, who is perhaps one of the most organized human beings I've ever met, for her tireless work today to make this event happen. These wonderful individuals have come together, and through honest conversations, we've created a better understanding of each other's roles and the parameters of these roles, and found ways to work creatively to help to support the needs of the families and children of Suffolk County. It is with that spirit that we come here today, to take these solution-focused conversations forward and to learn from each other, to create a deeper understanding of the voids in our community and hopefully find ways to eliminate the barriers and fill those voids. We will take the information from today's event and plan to present it to the legislators to use as a basis to build upon new county-wide initiatives. But first, there are a few housekeeping items that we need to address. Right, there we go. We have invited to this conference today some of the best minds and hearts of Suffolk County. Your voice is so important to us, so please ask questions. We're going to have lots of time for questions. After each panel, there's going to be like 15 minutes for questions, and then we have a significant amount of time at the end of today's presentation. There's 3 ways that you can ask your question and that your voice can be heard. The first one is that there will be committee members, Annie, you want to raise your hand, in the audience with microphones during the question and answer time. The second is there's some index cards in the back, on the back corners, and there's a box there. You could take an index card and ask a question that way. And for those of you that are more tech savvy, you can use the app. So the app is here, and you would just be able to enter your questions there. I can't guarantee that all the questions will be answered today, but what we can say is that we're going to review them all and answer them and put the answers back up on the app as soon as we're able to. There's also an area, because when we have all these brains together, it's really important to have an opportunity for you to give us bright ideas, right? So there's an area, if someone has a brilliant idea of something that you know from your work that could help in a situation, or just something that could help countywide, please give us the ideas, because we are going to be looking at that as part of the committee. And it's really important to us to have that. And there's also going to be a post-event evaluation for you to fill out. And again, all information is important, so that way moving forward we can make sure that we are doing the right thing to address everyone's needs and concerns. So I just kind of want to get a little better idea of who's in the audience, for everyone to have an idea yourself. And so if anyone, when I kind of name systems, if you identify with that system, just can you raise your hands? Who here is from law enforcement? Do we have anyone here from law enforcement? Nice to have you. There's a lot behind the stage here from law enforcement too. So that's they're coming. And the education? Yeah, there's the education. K through 12 programs. And I know we have several universities that we're attending. Anyone from universities? Good to see you. Thank you. Anyone work with special needs or special education? Great, great. And victim support services? Good to see you all. CPS, DSS, Office of Children and Family Services. They're elsewhere in this place also right now. Legal and court systems. And medical, we've got medical hospitals. So you can see that there's a huge array of folks here. Anyone here from like the OASIS system working with people who have substance abuse issues? Anyone from the Office of Mental Health Services or work with clients who have mental health issues? Anyone here from the Office for People with Developmental Disabilities or work with people who have developmental disabilities? Okay, great. And how about government or elected officials? I think they're also behind here, many of them. And also churches or other faith-based organizations. See, it's just clear how it takes community, right? We all have our roles. We all have our space and place to protecting our children. But through today, I hope that we get to become more of a community that works together. And I'm really excited because I think that we're going to make some changes today. So in a few minutes, you're going to have a lot of our county-wide elected officials will be joining us here on stage. But first, I would like to invite Dr. Sylvia Diaz, the Deputy County Executive for Health and Human Services and Education, to come up on stage and start us off.
Good morning, Jen. Thank you so much for the warm introduction. And this is so exciting. This is essentially the brain trust of the Child Protective System here in Suffolk County. And to have all of you folks in the same room is just an amazing opportunity. And so we're so grateful for this. In addition to the guests that are scheduled to be here today, including our county executive, District Attorney Ray Tierney, Sheriff Errol Toulon. Also joining us today, or expected to join us today at some point, is our Comptroller John Kennedy, Legislator Sam Gonzalez, Assemblyman Keith Brown, Legislator Leslie Kennedy, Legislator Trish Bergen, Legislator Chad Lennon, Legislator Dominic Thorne, Legislator Rich Berg, Legislator Stephanie Bontempi, and Legislator Flotterin. So as you see those folks today mingling about, say hello. And every one of them has an important role as well. So I want to thank everyone again for coming to this conference, our conference on creating transformational change in the children and for children and families involved in the child protective system. As Jen mentioned, I'm the Deputy County Executive for Health, Human Services, and Education. It's the first time that this role has been created, and it speaks to the importance that the County Executive has placed in this space. This conference came about as a result of a purposeful listening tour that the County Executive undertook when he first came into office 11 months ago. And like many of you, the County Executive had a lot of questions about the Child Protective Services system, and in particular about some of the high-profile cases that we've all read about. One of his first actions as county executive early in January was to visit with the CPS administration and caseworkers, and he talked with them about his own role and his expectations for transforming the agency, but he also did a lot of listening. These were not easy conversations, but a good leader steps in and, most importantly, steps up to the challenges that lie ahead. As we are gathered here today, we recognize that change is not easy. Engaging in difficult but meaningful and purposeful conversations was how all of this began back in January, and so it makes sense to continue on that path today. The challenges we face in serving Suffolk's families and children are very complex, I don't have to tell you that. And the solutions are anything but simple. Today we will have some of those conversations, and many of us will have differing perspectives and opinions as we dive into the realities of the county's child welfare system. However, it is precisely through these honest and sometimes tense conversations that we can uncover meaningful insights that pave the way towards real improvements. Our commitment today is to work collaboratively, to listen actively, and to challenge the status quo in pursuit of transformational change that truly benefits families and children. Together, we will embrace this opportunity to innovate, inspire, and ultimately create a brighter, safe, and more nurturing future for those we serve, especially those children who need us the most. So I want to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here today, and we look forward to continuing on this path. And with that, I would like to invite our Suffolk County Executive, Ed Romaine, to come up and share some of his thought about what lies ahead. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank, to begin with, Dr. Diaz. And I want to welcome you all and thank you for being here. This is an important subject that needs to be discussed, that needs the input of everyone in this room. I look out, I see people from the county attorney's office, I see our commissioner of health, I see people from our IT department, I see Karen LaGursa, who is the administrative judge for family court. I see other family court judges. Give a wave. I see you guys out there. I see those who work in social services. I see those who work in child protective services. I see a county legislator. Give a wave, Chad. And I'm sure there's other legislators here as well. What this says is we're all interested in this subject. We're all interested in moving forward. We know that change was necessary. We had a number of wake-up calls. The Thomas Valva case was only one of them. The big question is, what do we do now? What do we do now? Someone once said the four most important letters in the English language are N-E-X-T. Next, what comes next? And what comes next, we're going to talk a little bit about today. We're going to talk about the directions that we should be seeking. And no one ever gets things done by themselves. And believe me, I'm no exception to that rule. And I have colleagues, I have all of the experts, people who work in the field out there. They have some of the most difficult jobs in the world. But I also have, and we made up a challenge coin for today. And I'm going to present this to the district attorney, our sheriff, and our two deputy police commissioners that are here, because I work with them on this issue as well as all the social workers and all the other parts of this. But we all have to be going on the same page. I know I'm lobbying for state legislation that would allow law enforcement in certain cases to go in and check the files out, just to have the information that we would need to do the right things. That legislation hasn't made it through yet. It's something that I have to do. And I look out at all the faces here, particularly those who work in child protective services. And I want to thank Jennifer, who is the chairperson of our advisory committee. Thank you for your work. Thank you. Thank you for what you do. You know what I hope comes out of this conference? And particularly when we have that bagels outside. Hopefully they have the bagels outside. They have croissants or something, whatever, a cup of coffee. That we talk to one another and see what we can do and what changes we can make to make this system run better. I know one thing that we can do is to get more child protective service workers, more social service employees, so that caseloads can come down. And we are working on that. Right now, starting salary is, I think, $61,000, $62,000. We're doing a salary study to see where it should be. But we want to recruit people. Not only do we want to recruit people, I just was speaking to a lady from Stony Brook. Is she out in the audience? Well, I want to work with Stony Brook University and the other higher education institutes to put together training programs, because this is a field where we really do need training and occasional refreshment of knowledge that other people have come across to help strengthen our system. Later in the day, we're going to hear from Katie Beers, and I think we all remember 1992 and that situation. And I followed it. At the time, I was the county clerk. And I'm like, wow, how did this happen? I'm very concerned about our children who are at jeopardy, who need the protection. Most times, parents protect their children, but there are situations where social services and child protective services have to step in. I am concerned about those situations. I want Katie to tell her story, and she's going to be joined by Carolyn Gustoff. Used to work for News 12, now works for CBS, tremendous journalist, someone I have a great deal of respect for, and she's going to be speaking as well. So I'm going to turn it over to the people that know something. I know very little. I'm trying to learn every day more about what I can do as the county executive to support those who work in this field. I said it during the election. I don't like to bring it up that often, but I have 3 grandchildren, and my oldest sat next to Thomas Valver in 3rd grade, and we had to tell him that his friend was not coming back. And the teachers of that school had called about the problems that they saw. And somehow those messages didn't rise to the level of concern and were missed. I don't want to see too many more missed opportunities. I want to make sure that we have the proper training, we have sufficient staff, and we have the resources and the funding to do it. I don't govern this county alone. I have 18 legislators, like Chad is one of them, and we work together. We're a team. I also work with our DA and our sheriff and our police department and our social service commissioner, John Enhoff, who I believe is doing a very good job, and our health department, and all of us. We're all in this together. Our job as public servants is to try to make this county a better place for everyone, particularly to protect our children. So thank you. I'm going to ask our DA, Ray Tierney, come on out. And our sheriff and our 2 deputy police commissioners, Earl, Kevin, Belinda. These are my colleagues, along with the legislature, along with all of you. We all work for county government. Let's do the things that are right. They help tremendously. I know the DA, he did the right thing. He impaneled the grand jury. I think it was 80 pages long, the report. 87? But the day that report came out, we had a change in the leadership of the social service department. And I had the opportunity then to bring in Dr. Emhoff. I need all of us. If anyone feels that their voice isn't being heard, call me, email me. You all know my email address if you work for county government. It's the same as yours, first name, dot, last name, at suffolkcountiny.gov. I read my emails. Feel free to send me an email. There's no retaliation, none of that nonsense. We've got to do this together. We're all in this together. If I can help a situation, that's what I'm there for. I'm there. My biggest job as county executive is to help those who work for county government do their job. So we're partners. Call on me. If you think I should know something that I don't, help me out. Give me that knowledge. If you think there's something happening that I should be involved in, or there's a change that needs to be made, feel free to contact me. I work with you as well as work for you. Thank you, and God bless for attending this conference. And let me give my challenge coins to some of my partners here. District Attorney. Thank you. Sheriff. Thank you. Deputy Police Commissioner. Deputy Police Commissioner. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to our District Attorney at this point.
Thank you so much, Ed. Wow, I'm not used to, usually I'm used to talking in front of maybe 5 or 6 people, so this is a little new. This is going to be a great conference. I want to thank Dr. Diaz and others for putting it together. You know, as Ed said, before I guess I get into it, I want to thank Ed for his partnership. I think historically in the county, we operated all within our little silos. And, you know, that's not helpful to anyone, especially when you're talking about the issue that we're discussing today. It's important. Collaboration and working together are so important, and Ed has really facilitated that. I have great partners to my left, obviously. We have great partners all across the county in the Department of Social Services, Stony Brook, Suffolk County Community Hospital. And when you're talking about an issue as pernicious and as persistent and as widespread as trying to keep our kids safe, well, it's going to take all of us, and it's going to take all of us working together. As Ed discussed, we had this grand jury report, and I'm thankful and I'm grateful that that grand jury report, that was not the conclusion of the investigation and the improvement of child services here in Suffolk County. That was the start. That was designed, it was designed right from the very beginning to be an investigative report, meaning how could we improve our practices? What could we do better to ensure the health, safety, and welfare of some of our most vulnerable members of our society? So that was what that document was designed to do, and I'm grateful that everyone else in the county has sort of picked up the momentum and is working towards best practices. And I guess I'll end with this because back before I got on, I had the opportunity to speak with Dr. Hopgood, who is a forensic examiner of children, and it sort of reminded me she's sort of at the beginning of this process, and myself and the district attorney's office, we're sort of at the end. And there are so many people in between those 2 points, so many people who serve a vital function. So I think what this conference is meant to do is to get all those various parts. We learn about each other, we learn what our roles are, and we learn how to work together to best serve our constituents. So again, I'm very thankful to be here. I'm very thankful for all of you, and I know this is going to be a great conference, so thank you all very much.
Hi, good morning. My name is Dr. Errol Toulon Jr., and I'm the Sheriff of Suffolk County. And I want to thank all of you for being here, because this is extremely important to me. Since I became sheriff, I've been into 1 to 2 schools per week, talking to students about a multitude of things, from Amityville to Montauk, North Shore to South Shore, continuing to talk to our young children about a variety of things that they are experiencing. So, I'm very honored that County Executive Romaine asked me to speak, and of course my colleagues with DA Tierney, Deputy Police Commissioner Groneman, and Deputy Police Commissioner Catalina. I can tell you, and you probably heard this 1,000 times today, about the collaboration and the way we work together to really make sure that our residents are safe from children being abused, the fentanyl crisis, or gang-related issues here in Suffolk County. And I hope that this conference will help us all gain a better understanding, including myself, of how we can improve services and collaboration. Oftentimes affected, incarcerated individuals interact with Child Protective Services. And recognizing this, we have implemented programs through our START Resource Center, which is an acronym for Sheriff's Transition and Reentry Team, that we're focusing on addressing the needs of the entire family. Incarcerated individuals and their families may have experienced issues like homelessness, food insecurity, unemployment, trauma, and mental health issues. And our START team, who are correctional officers by civil service title, but have been trained additionally to help those really post-incarceration. We want to make sure that these men and women are getting the services that they need when they leave our facilities, not just when they're in our facilities, because 85% of the men and women that are housed in Riverhead and Yaphank are returning back to our community. 15% are going to state prison. So you'll never know if you're in Target, Stop and Shop, Walmart, if the person in front of you or behind you just got out of the Suffolk County Jail, because they are not going to be wearing a scarlet letter. So we have a network of outside service providers and government partners that we work with to continue to provide services once they are released. And by giving them the tools they need to succeed, we can make positive changes that betters the formerly incarcerated, their families, and our communities. Thank you again, and I hope for a successful and enlightening conference.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kevin Catalina. I'm a Deputy Commissioner with the Suffolk County Police Department. And I want to thank everybody for coming out today for such an important issue. When a tragedy like the Thomas Valva case happens, it not only shocks law enforcement and the political community and the public service community, but it shocks the conscience of society. And you know, I think collectively we have to make sure that our most vulnerable victims, our children, are safe. And, you know, in law enforcement, we unfortunately have the benefit of hindsight, and hindsight here tells us that, you know, the mistakes that were made just can't happen again. So I'd like to say it was an honor to be a part of the committee that examined this issue and worked on changes, positive changes, that could prevent an issue like that from ever happening again, because, you know, nobody in this room ever wants to experience something like that again. So, and I really want to thank County Executive Romaine for shining a spotlight on this problem. You know, I think that he was the leader that we needed to galvanize our forces and get together and really attack this issue. The District Attorney, Tierney, who was so important with impaneling a grand jury and looking at this issue and figuring out, you know, all of the issues that needed to be fixed. Dr. Emhoff, who's been, you know, just amazing in taking control of the organization, CPS, and you know, transforming it and doing all of the things that needed to be done, you know, to work on the issue and bringing the team together to fix it. Obviously, the sheriff and all of our other partners in this. And I could tell you from a law enforcement perspective, somebody that ultimately, you know, has people out who are investigating these cases with our partners, the changes made are going to be so valuable for law enforcement to make sure that nobody slips through the cracks. Again, our most vulnerable victims don't slip through the cracks, and we're able to investigate these cases the way they need to be investigated, and ultimately keep those children safe and bring to justice the people that are responsible for these, you know, heinous acts. So again, I think it's going to be a wonderful conference. You're going to hear later from our special victims supervisor, Lieutenant Cassidy. He's going to talk about some of the ways that these changes, you know, have helped him and his team with these investigations. But enjoy the conference. I hope everybody gets a lot out of it. And again, thank you all for coming. Oh, and now Belinda Groneman is going to come up. She's my partner, the other deputy commissioner, and talk about some of her experiences with this issue.
Excuse me, I'm getting old. I have to change glasses here. Hold on. So good morning, everyone. And I'm just here basically to let you know that on a personal note, when the investigation of Katie Beers was going on, my husband was in the 1st precinct. I was involved with the investigation. I was in the district attorney's office in family crimes. And I just remember when Katie was being interviewed and she'd come into the office after the arrest of the perpetrator, I knew she was going to be okay. And that's because of the counseling that was provided and the caring nature of the assigned ADAs. And I say that for a reason, because my girlfriend, who passed away, Derry Schwartz, Bookamer, I remember speaking with Derry, and I would say to her, Katie's going to be fine. And she'd say, why did you say that for? And I said, because she is getting the assistance, the counseling that she needed. And this is brief, and I'm just going to let you know that I can't wait to see Katie when she comes here and give her a big hug, because I want her to know that we were all there praying for her. And she's going to speak out today. And for me, it's just basically just saying that I am so blessed. We prayed a lot for her. But I will tell you something else that happened in July of this year. We formed what's called the Law Enforcement Advisory Board, and that's with the sheriff and the district attorney's office, collaboration. And as we move forward, that's exactly what this is all about anyway. It's about collaboration. We just want to tell you from the bottom of our hearts, if you ever need us, feel free to give us a call, and God bless each and every one of you. Thank you. And I really can't wait to give Katie a hug.
Thank you, everyone. I'd now like to introduce the Commissioner of the Department of Social Services for Suffolk County, Dr. John Imhoff.
Thank you. Good morning. Over here? Wow. Good morning, everyone. It's a privilege to be here. Speak about a transformational program. We have it right before us. You are all part of a very historic time in the development of social and health policy in Suffolk County. And when the county executive met with me and wanted me to join Suffolk County in social services, the message I got from him was very, very clear. And it's a message that I can boil down to 3 words: no more silos. No more silos. We're all colleagues. We all have our organizations. We have our goals and our mission, but our doors have to open. Our minds, hearts, and programs have to collaborate. We got to work together. We are all colleagues. And until we do that, there can't be any change. So county executives told me very clearly, we have to work together. We have to go outside our walls. We have to have meetings. We're going to disagree at times, but that's fine. But we have to work together. And that's the message, I think, of this entire conference. If we do that, we can make great change happen. And we've already started to do that here in Suffolk County in social services. And that's because of the cooperation and the collegiality of all of the staff involved and the administration. So I'm privileged to be here. I think you're going to have a great conference. And as I end, I'm going to pick up my garbage that just went to the floor. So thank you. Thanks very much. See you later.
Thank you, Commissioner. So I want to introduce our first panel, and our first panel is going to be the Suffolk County Multidisciplinary Team. And I'm going to introduce our moderator first for our panel, Dr. Diana Filiano from Stony Brook. Diana. And then we have Detective Lieutenant Brian Cassidy, Annette Mahoney-Cross, Medei Chicas, Dr. Jillian Hopgood, Faith Lavelle, and Raphael Pearl as they are entering stage. And go ahead, Diana.
Okay. Well, hello, everybody. I want to thank all of the government officials who spoke before and all of you who are sitting out here, because after this conference, when we compile the information that we hope will be coming from this, we are going to be knocking on doors and sending those emails and talking. So if you're here, you've kind of committed yourself. So thank you very much. I also want to acknowledge Karen Lamprio, who is also part of the committee, the planning committee, and her name accidentally got omitted. So I wanted to acknowledge that, and hopefully she heard me acknowledge. So we're going to start today with the multidisciplinary team, and they'll be talking to you about when a case actually comes to them. So this is really to give, we got a few, thank you for those of you who did the survey prior, because we got some questions and some concerns. And I think there's a lot of concern about what exactly happens. So we will begin with Jennifer is going to be the mandated reporter, and I want to remind everyone that the mandated reporter is not part of the multidisciplinary team. She's going to describe a case as a mandated reporter and how that sort of goes up the ranks. And she'll provide some background, and we'll take it from there. Go ahead.
I think I got this on, but I don't know.
It takes a moment.
All right. There you go. Okay. So the thing that was interesting to me is that, as someone who's worked in the schools as long as I have, when I do a CPS report and I call it into the central registrar, it's a very impassioned conversation. It's a long, detailed conversation. And I was interested to find out, or shocked to find out, how much the SCR actually communicates that with the people over at CPS. So I'm going to go through this quickly, but it's just giving you some background information that, so that way you can see some issues that might be behind a case that they might be getting. So I'm just going to give you a little story, right? Jane's teacher brought her down to my office. I'm playing the role of a school social worker right now. And the teacher says to me that Jane has been really crying in class and seems upset, but she won't talk to the teacher. So the teacher brings her to my office. I talk to Jane. At first, Jane won't speak to me. She's, upset, crying, shut down. But she eventually just says underneath her breath, "He's gross." And I talk to her, and she eventually says that she's referring to her stepfather, John. And it comes out that about a month ago, he told her that he would do something special for her and that he would teach her how to drive. Well, Jane's only 14, but that was really enticing to her. To learn how to drive, it sounds like something fun, so they went off to go learn how to drive. And as she's driving and learning and scared, he puts his hand over towards her. She thinks to help her in case the steering wheel needs to be moved, but he puts his hand on her leg and slowly moves his hand up to eventually he's in her private areas. She doesn't know what to do. She's trying to not only learn how to drive, but navigate this horrific situation and uncomfortableness. And so she freezes, and he continues to touch her, and it gets harder and more uncomfortable for her. And the cycle of being frozen and not knowing what to do continues. So she, eventually says, "I'm done. I don't want to drive anymore. Let's go back." But really it was that it gave her an out. So she held this for about a month. And finally that morning she told her mother. And her mother was very upset over it. And that's why Jane was breaking down in class. I asked Jane if something like this had ever happened before. She did not have any answers to that. But I also said to her, "Is he still in the home?" And she said to me, she goes, "Well, no, my mom asked him to leave because we think that he might have done something to my sister, but it's hard because, she's nonverbal, she has autism. But whenever he enters the room, she gets scared and seems fearful." And then my mom caught him looking at some stuff on the internet that I don't know exactly what it was, but it was upsetting to her. So with that information, and after my conversation with Jane and making sure that she was in a safe place, I called that into the Central Registrar, and they founded the case.
So I want to what's that? Yep. So it's a fairly detailed bit of information that doesn't always get conveyed, or it does get conveyed, but it does not get conveyed in that way to the Department of Social Service, Child Protective Services, correct? So are we waiting to see that on? Yeah, we need to put up the SCR? Okay. Well, we'll have, let me give it to Annette so she can talk about when the report comes in.
Good morning. So when you call the hotline, whether it's the mandated reporter line or the line for the general public, that call goes to the Office of Children and Family Services. We do not get that call locally. So New York State will listen to you. If any of you have made a phone call, you can be on the phone for 45 minutes to an hour sometimes. I recently made a report and I was on the phone close to an hour. So I'm going to read you the narrative after your phone call. This is based on a real case. This is the information that came to us. So the narrative indicates that the stepfather, John, touched Jane, age 14, in a sexually inappropriate manner. A month ago, while in the care alone, the stepfather touched Jane's vagina over her clothes. The roles of the mother, Mary Ann, age 8, and Jack, age 1, are unknown. So that tells me in this case that there are 3 minor children: Jane, age 14, Mary Ann, age 8, and Jack, age 1. That is the call narrative. We also received miscellaneous information. The miscellaneous in this specific case indicates that the source reported that the stepfather has recently moved out of the home because of a previous incident. Further details are unknown. The The source did not have the stepfather's current address, and the source reports that Anne, age 8, attends a school for children with disabilities, and it is believed Anne has limited speech. Locating information, the mother and children are currently at home. The location of the stepfather is unknown. So in a typical situation, you may call the state, and this is going to come to us anywhere from 15 to 45 minutes after that call is registered. When it comes down from the state, it comes to my intake unit here in Suffolk County, and they're going to review the case. When a case like this comes to us, the report is actually going to tell us that this is a multidisciplinary team case. So what does that mean? It means that this case alleges something that could be criminal, and that we need to share this with the police and the district attorney. So they look at it, they identify it as being a multidisciplinary team case, and it will be assigned by geographic location to one of our abuse teams. We have 2 abuse teams that handle our most serious cases of physical abuse, as well as all of our cases of sexual abuse. When we receive this report, one of the first steps before we do anything else is the report gets faxed to our partners in law enforcement in the Special Victims Section of Suffolk County Police, as well as to the District Attorney's Office. So when this report was received, it was assigned to one of our abuse teams. They immediately reach out to our partners in law enforcement, sometimes even before they call the mandated reporter. It gets assigned to a detective, and they start planning for a joint response. When we have these type of cases, and it's about 10% of the reports we receive a year, it's very important that when at all possible, police and CPS act in a joint manner in a safe place for a child when possible. So we're fortunate that we have the Child Advocacy Center in Central Islip, as well as a separate Child Advocacy Center in Riverhead, where if there is a non-offending parent or a parent without allegations, we can try to have that child brought to this wonderful, family-friendly, child-friendly environment where we have medical facilities, we have victim services facilities, and we are able, police and law enforcement, to do that joint interview together. So why do we do a joint interview? Well, it's just simply better practice. We work in a model called forensic best practices, and that means that our caseworkers doing these investigations, as well as our partners in law enforcement, are trained in the same interviewing technique and style. This is authorized by New York State, and it is required as part of that type of investigation. So in this case, we have a mom who is not a subject, meaning that there are no allegations against this mother, because if there were, she could not go to the Child Advocacy Center. That is designed for children and non-offending folks. You don't want offenders going to a Child Advocacy Center, even if it's not founded. Simply that there's an allegation is enough. So we would coordinate with our partners in law enforcement, and at that point, my staff would very often then be calling the mandated reporter. If the mandated reporter is available, right, because you're not on call 24 hours a day, if the mandated reporter is available, one of the first things we're going to do is actually read to you what's in the report. How many people have had that happen where the CPS worker calls you, right? How many times is there some type of error or something that got misconstrued, right? It happens. So that's why we're calling you to say, is this what you said? We should also be asking other questions about how well do you know this family? Sometimes you don't know them at all. You know, other times you know them quite well. When was the last time you spoke to this child? Was there anyone else present? Sometimes we may even ask you if the child is in school and can we come to the school? And we would also come with our partners in law enforcement. So in this specific, this is not an exact case, but it's based on a case. In this case, we were able to reach out to the mother by telephone after coordinating with our law enforcement partners, reaching out to our partners at the CAC, and have all of these children brought to the Child Advocacy Center for joint interviews. Now, the 1-year-old obviously couldn't be interviewed, but we still want to see that child, try to get an idea about the child's development. We're going to have that parent sign releases of information for schools, doctors, treatment programs, so we can make those collateral contacts to do a global assessment of what's happening for that child and family. So I'm going to pass it off to Brian, our partner in the police department.
Before you pass that off, Annette,
Sure.
could you address the time frame that
Yes.
occurs? Because I think there's a lot that goes on in a pretty short period of time.
Absolutely. So when a report is received and accepted by the local district, which here is Suffolk County, we are required to make an assessment of safety within 24 hours. That assessment of safety can include many things, but in Suffolk, we do require our staff to make an attempt at a face-to-face contact and an interview. In these cases, very often, time is of the essence, and we want to work as closely with law enforcement as we can. So in these type of cases, we really try to go out same day. Mind you, remember, we are not emergency services. It's not like calling 911. When we deal with these cases, we also want to do it in a mindful, planned way, because we want to work to keep that child safe and do interviews in a way to protect the integrity of those disclosures if we receive them. So again, this is all usually within 24 hours.
And I'm just going to do a follow-up question to that is, before it goes to Lieutenant Cassidy, what, and maybe you said this and I apologize, what would make this case specifically involve the police?
So this case alleges some form of sexual abuse. It's not very specific in the allegations, in the report, right? It really talks about inappropriate contact. But this is something that would be flagged for follow-up in the multidisciplinary team with law enforcement.
Thank you.
Oh, one more thing. The reports actually tell us when they come in. So we get a list of pages, and it says MDT on the report from the State Central Registry. So we know.
So you, when you get the report, you're not identifying it as a multidisciplinary team. It is being identified for you.
It is often identified for us. However, that does not prohibit us from looking at a case and saying, we believe this is an MDT case. Let's talk to the police about it, or let's call our partners and our attorneys to talk about, should we refer this to the MDT?
And could you talk about that? Oh, I have a lot of questions, sorry. Can you talk about some of the criteria that might, if it didn't come in as an MDT case, some of the criteria that might make you have that conversation?
So we're going to look for incidents that rise to a potential crime against a child. So if you have a child with broken bones, a battered child, something that alludes to other potential sex abuse. And the great thing is that we do have partnerships with our counsel to kind of say, hey, what do you think about this? Does it rise to that standard? Because not all reports do. Like I said, in Suffolk County, it's around 10%, depending on the year, that do come down in our MDT cases.
Thank you. Lieutenant Cassidy.
Good morning. You heard Annette mention several times about working with partners, and specifically partners with law enforcement. One of the reasons that I think that lines up in terms of the Suffolk County Police Department is specifically for special victims is what our protocols for accepting a case are. So as opposed to, I'd say, something that maybe people have seen on TV, the Special Victims SVU, which follows the New York City model, Suffolk County is a little bit different, and it's why we actually, I believe, line up more with CPS, specifically for the MDTs. Our protocols are, if it's a sexual abuse or physical abuse, it's under 18, so it's a minor, that has a special relationship, whether that's a teacher, coach, parent, or has some sort of special relationship with a child. And then any child abuse, physical or sexual, for a child under 13. So it's not necessarily what you'd normally necessarily see on TV. It is a very specific set of parameters that involve minors, which then puts us much more in line with the cases coming through CPS. And so when the MDT comes, and a little explanation for special victims, I have 2 investigative teams with detectives, each with a sergeant. So there's 2 sergeants and 6 detectives on each team. In addition, special victims, we also handle the Megan's Law reporting. So we currently have 2 detectives assigned to Megan's Law. But when the MDT comes in, or excuse me, when the SCR comes in and when it's faxed over from CPS, there's an evaluation done by either myself or one of the sergeants to take a look to see, does it fit our protocols? So there is the possibility that as it's coming in and additional information is coming, that it might get assigned to a precinct, that it still needs to be looked at for the criminal aspects of what the case involves, but it doesn't follow the protocols of what special victims looks at. At the same time, at any particular point, the commissioner or my boss, the inspectors, the chief of detectives could say, you know what, because of the sensitivity, and this will happen every once in a while, there was a case a couple of years ago in the 7th precinct of unfortunately, I say a rape, but it involved small children being in the house. Even though the rape was an adult, the commissioner felt that that was more in line with the interviews happening with special victims, so that we're not exclusive to those protocols, yet at the same time, we generally stick to those protocols unless there's some extenuating circumstances which would bring it to special victims. In terms of the assignment, the detectives work, I'll say, on a wheel. So as the wheel goes, you're next up. So everybody, as the SCRs are coming through, they get assigned to the detective that's next up. And so we go through the rotation. All of the detectives have been trained in I say, the best practices in the child first protocols, so that when we do go out with CPS, everybody has had the same training and should be looking at the case in a very similar fashion. Again, the goal being to get the child to, I'll call it a safe place, which then involves the CAC. And having that interview take place in an environment where what we were trying to do is get a disclosure and find out what happened. And you're trying to make the child feel as safe and as comfortable as possible. So to bring them to a place where it's not necessarily the cement cinder blocks of the precinct, or I say the rooms with the fluorescent lighting, that they're at a comfortable place, that there are, I say, colors that, just more welcoming room where a child can be interviewed. And then again, with our detectives, it goes to the idea we're trying to be, I say, less intimidating. So my detectives go in what is about as close to plain clothes as you can get, but not even the suit and tie. It's usually a knit shirt and pants to basically be able to connect with the child a little bit, so that we've made the efforts to lower the intimidation value for the child. And then having, I say, the CAC as a partner here, with the idea that we can have a safe environment, that the child can feel safe, and that we can try to get to the disclosure to find out what actually happened.
Can I add on to, did you want to go?
I just want to add, my partner Brian talked about some of the cases they may be involved in that we might not. In order for CPS in New York State to register a report, the allegations must be against a person legally responsible under the law. Not a teacher, not a coach, not a random guy in the woods. We're talking about people living in the house, a parent substitute, a step-parent, grandpa lives in the house. So folks that are regularly known to this child, sort of in a familial situation, who spend time around that child. Now, the definition can be somewhat flexible, but you may call the SCR and they may say, we're not accepting your report because we don't consider that a person legally responsible. What the SCR may do in that situation is register what's called a law enforcement referral, and that would only go to law enforcement. We would not see it on the CPS side. So there are Brian's teams, special victims, law enforcement, they do handle cases we don't, and we also handle cases they wouldn't. So it really depends upon the role of the adult in the child's life.
So this might be being addressed, but I want to make sure that everyone in the audience has understanding, because I think what occurs with communication is sometimes the use of lingo. So you made mention of forensic interview. So many people out here would know what that is, but if one of you, any of you, could describe the difference between a forensic interview and something that social workers who are mandated reporters in schools or other places would do. Could you make that distinction, please?
We follow a model called Forensic Best Practices, and it is a specialized training. And the purpose of this training is to ultimately have a clean interview that causes the least amount of trauma to a child. So when you go through this training, you're trained not to use leading questions. You're trained to question to gather information and evidence, either to support or not support the claim. We're not there to say, exactly what happened. We're there to find out what happened. So it's different than, as some school social workers in the room or school psychologists. You guys are doing interviews for different purposes. These interviews are being done to potentially use in legal proceedings. So when I did these interviews 1,001 years ago, if I had to do them in a school, and I think I might have done some with Jennifer back in the day, what I would very often do, whether my law enforcement partner was with me or not, is I might ask the school staff who was present, can you please sit out of the line of sight of the child? Can you please not interject during the interview? We need to get the cleanest interview possible. And I also don't want to have you guys called by my friends down there as witnesses, right? So we want to be able to make sure that child can be focused on the person doing the interview. Very often when we do them joint, we might bounce off of each other. Or one person may go in without the other. At the CAC, we can watch the interviews. And we also have access to our CAC 24 hours a day. I have the cell phone numbers of all the folks over there. So, but the goal and the purpose is it is a legal type of interview. It is not to gather social emotional information. It's not to gather information for special ed purposes. It is specifically designed to gather information and a potential disclosure.
Just to follow up, and for the educators in the room, and this seems to happen more, what we also are trying to do is limit the amount of times the child is interviewed about the incident. So there are times that we have gone out and the child to make a disclosure to say, and I say not to follow a chain, but make a disclosure to the aide. Then there's an additional interview by the teacher. Then we go down to the principal. Then there's an administrator that gets involved. And then there's the superintendent gets involved. And by that point, the child has potentially been interviewed 5 times. That is not a best practice. So it's not to say that we're not looking for the information to be, or that we're not looking for the disclosure. At the same time, we're not looking to have the child interviewed 5 times before we've even gotten to, I'll say, a best practice forensic interview. So just, you know, for the educators to keep that in mind is that, yes, we do need to know the basics, but in terms of continuing, I don't want to call it an interrogation, but it can become almost an interrogation of the child, because once the child's been asked several times, things can change or they might even shut down because they're tired of telling the story over and over again. The other thing I would just throw out is that the other source and one of the other places that we can get, and just to go through an example of the, I'll say the logistics, there are times that there'll be a 911 call that the police officer will respond first. So it's not necessarily coming from or going through the state initially, but in order for us to get CPS involved, this is where police officers will call, and we will wait for the SER, the LER to come back to us so that we can get CPS involved. Sorry.
One of the other pieces of the forensic interview process is learning about the child's language. You know, anyone that's ever sat in on one is, we'll ask child, how do they identify their body parts? What words do they use? You know, what do you call this on a boy? What do you call that on a girl? You know, we should also be looking, in this specific report, there was a child with very limited verbal ability. So in that case, what we should be doing is talking to the folks involved with that child, and does the child use any language? We may not be able to do a traditional interview, but we can try to get a gauge about the developmental piece for this child. Are we able to interview this child? Is there something else? Was there a behavior change in this child recently? But a lot of it is figuring out where the child is. Is the child a normal 8-year-old? Does the child have normal speech? Does a child use different words? We all have different words we use in our families for private parts, right? What does this kid use? We don't want to go in there and use the proper, proper terms, and the child's never heard that word before. So a lot of the forensic interviewing is also child-led.
There was a question that came through the app, and before we move on to our next panelist, the question was, after a mandated reporter makes a call and it's registered, is there ever an instance to notify the alleged perpetrator? So if it's a person legally responsible, what's that process? Oh, that's an interesting question, apparently.
I'm going to say it depends. As a mandated reporter that's also worked in other settings, there are times I have notified a family I need to make a report. In an abuse situation, would I notify the family? No. So if I had a child that gave me enough information to make me have reasonable cause to suspect that there was some type of serious abuse or sex abuse, I'm probably not going to notify the family. But other situations which are different, depending on your relationship with the family, depending on circumstances. But what I'd say in these type of cases, you have to allow police and CPS to kind of get in and get the information needed. But there may be situations you may be working with a non-offending parent. That non-offending parent may be the person that discloses to you. A mom might come in, and I don't mean just to say mom, but a mom might come in to Jennifer and say, I think he's sexually abusing my daughter. In that case, you might want to think about sitting down with her and seeing, will she generate the report? Can you do it with her? So in the world we live in, there's a lot of what ifs. But I hope today, one thing you guys get out of this is leaving, you can always call us, right? You can always say, what do you think about this? And luckily, you know, we have contact with all of these folks in the panel to even have further discussion. So in these cases, I certainly wouldn't know.
Did you want to say something?
Just to add that even from the start, the child's safety and the child's well-being is paramount. So even if it's coming from the police department where we might be looking to make an arrest, the bottom line is always going to be child safety first. And so in terms of reaching out to a parent, the consideration, overriding consideration is what safe plan do we have in place to protect the child?
Thank you. And I wanted to make sure we spent some time really laying a good foundation so that people had an understanding of some of the basics, because I think when you make a call, you say, well, what happens now? I haven't heard anything. And this is all what's happening. So I want to progress. So this sort of is, even though they act as a team, there is sort of a linear piece. So I want to progress to Medea Chicas from the Suffolk County Child Advocacy Center. And she's going to talk to us about her role in this. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. So my first interaction when an interview is going to be conducted at the CAC, it would be with the detective and the CPS worker assigned. We would complete an intake that we do at our office, which this covers the basic demographics for the child, the alleged allegation. Then we do have a section called the pre-interview section, which this promotes almost like a mini MDT meeting with the staff. We ask questions like, has the child been interviewed previously? Because this lets us know, has this family had interaction with CPS or Special Victims Unit before? It also makes us aware how knowledgeable the parents might be about the forensic interview process, and also if it's an initial or a follow-up interview. We do ask about impacted siblings, just because we know when trauma is present, it doesn't affect just one individual, it affects the whole family unit. So in this case, I would be made aware that there's an 8-year-old sibling who's nonverbal and a 1-year-old sibling. We also ask about runaway incidents, just because this raises a red flag for situations like trafficking or other services that might be needed. And then we also ask if there's anything we should be aware about before the interview. So this could be if there's been a history of domestic violence in the home, if the child has been hospitalized in the past, or if they need us to hold off on referrals until everything's been completed through our staff here. Once the forensic interview does begin, I make sure to introduce myself to the mother that would be present, to let her know what my role is, and it's really just to support her in anything that might come up. I also do my best to make her comfortable while she's waiting for her child. We talk over about different services she might need. You know, I might mention other services that other families have requested, whether it's like information on food pantries or counseling. We really do our best to just support the caregiver that's present. Once the interview has been completed, unless there's been any immediate needs for the family, whether it's like physically or emotionally, we let her know that I'll try to call her within the week. That way we can go over different referrals that she might need specifically for her family. When I do speak to the family, I make sure to remind her of what my role is, you know, that I met her in person, just because we want to be mindful that, especially in the initial investigation, there's a lot of phone calls. There's different people getting involved, so I want to just remind her of who I am and that I'm there to be a support for her. So we would just go over the basic needs that I had mentioned, whether it's information on food pantries or if she does need assistance applying for SNAP or if the daycare assistance is needed. And then once we review her local resources, I'll go into talking about mental health, not only for the child, but the whole family unit. We do speak about the importance of trauma-informed mental health. The reason for this is that we make a lot of referrals to an agency called Spark. They're under the retreat. They follow what we are required through the National Children's Alliance, that they have continuous education and they also have the licenses required to deal with these kinds of cases. We do also speak to the mother about New York State Office of Victim Services. This is something that's available through New York State. It's reimbursement program for any expenses that have been accrued due to the crime. So this could be if they have to pay for counseling out of pocket, or if they have to pay for Ubers to go to court, that could be reimbursed through the state. And even if when we initially do the application, there are no expenses, because this application does take a few months, we can do it ahead of time. That way, once reimbursement is needed for the family, it's a faster process for them. And follow-ups for each family, it can depend. There's some families where they just need a month, where we're just kind of keeping up with them, and then there's some families that might need longer support, whether it's we keep in contact for a year, and then we're always just there for any kind of support that they might need, especially like if we know that there's like some financial stress for the family right around for the holidays, we might reach out, see if we can help them with Adopt a Family or any programs like that. And we always let them know that if there's not anything needed at that time, we're always there to be a support, so they can reach out to us as well after. And in this case, we are going to do a medical, so I would explain briefly what the medical is and set up that appointment for the family at the Child Advocacy Center.
Well, you know I'm going to have follow-up questions. So this is the first time I'm hearing the spiels, so I have questions as we go along. You mentioned the victim's compensation claim. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And does every family member complete that? And how does that work for people?
Okay, so it is, like I mentioned, it is something that's available through New York State. It's for any expenses that were related to the crime. So not every family completes it that comes to the CAC, because there has to be a crime. So let's say if there was no disclosure, we would not complete that application because the crime has not occurred. But if there was a disclosure, we would do our best to suggest the family applies for it. There are some families that still choose to turn down, but they do have at least up to a year after the incident was reported to apply. Actually, coming up in December 31st of 2025, there are changes being made to that where they're extending it to 3 years, but it does vary per family. We do try to recommend it because expenses might not have happened at the time that they've come to the Child Advocacy Center, but they might occur later on or within a few months. So we do want to make them aware that it is an extra support to them as well.
Okay. Additionally, you mentioned that you also make referrals. You mentioned Spark. We know that, and this has been a very common discussion in the field, about the lack of mental health services for children, especially in Suffolk County, and we are in the process of working on that. A lot of people have made note of that through this conference. So with that little caveat, what types of other organizations or services are you referring out, and also what does the CAC offer directly?
So with mental health, we do our best we're always constantly looking out in the community for different resources that are for mental health, just because at least since we are accredited through the National Children's Alliance, we are required to only make mental health referrals with agencies we have linkage agreements with, which what that means is that they have the licenses required and then continuing education. So we are always looking out to the community to try to make those linkage agreements with different agencies, but we do want to make sure that when we are referring a family, we're referring to someone that is trauma-informed.
Okay, good. Thank you. So moving on, and as you can see, there's a lot that goes on just individually and then as a group. So this particular case might move to the CAC medical team, which is Dr. Hopgood. And can you please start us out by telling us what you would do when you would receive this case, and about the child forensic medical exam?
Sure, absolutely. Good morning, everyone. So medical care should be offered to a child who discloses sexual abuse. That is because child sexual abuse is a medical problem, and therefore medical attention should be part of the healing process. That does not necessarily matter if abuse happened way in the past versus if it happened very recently. It is still an important part of the therapeutic process for the child to receive medical care after something like this has happened. So our piece of the puzzle in terms of the medical aspects of care for a child after sexual abuse has occurred is to assure their health and their well-being. And we do so through a comprehensive physical exam of the child. What we do at the CAC, as has been mentioned, is we would receive a referral, or a request rather, for a medical examination. This would be at the request of either CPS or the district attorney's office. And the exam for a child who has experienced sexual abuse would be scheduled in advance, so it's not something that is a walk-in type assessment. It's scheduled in advance, and the nice thing is at the Child Advocacy Center, we have time. So we schedule these appointments for 2 hours, which is probably the longest healthcare visit you could possibly ever think of. But we allow for this time because much of the visit is about reassurance. And that is reassurance for the caregiver, that's reassurance for the child, and I'll touch on that more in just a moment. But the visit itself is booked for a lengthy time slot. The physical space of the Child Advocacy Center, as has been pointed out, is child-friendly, it is quiet, we have lots of toys. And we have lots of opportunity to focus on the child, and the child is at the center of the response. The child is also in control of the visit. So the child is given choices, is told they're the boss, and really is given back control when control had not been there previously. So this physical exam that is performed in the context of the CAC medical exam is very similar to what's done at a pediatrician's office, but with the exception that we look at private parts more in detail. So this is a natural process similar to what every child is familiar with doing in their regular physical exams that they have when they go for their well child care. So it's a head-to-toe exam, starting looking in the eyes, listening to heart and lungs, and so on, saving the genitals for last. Always preserving modesty, making sure that you're draping the child appropriately, and the child, again, is at the focus of the assessment, meaning they are in charge, and if they are not, for whatever reason, able to cooperate with any portion of the examination, that's okay. So there's never a time that a child is forced to have an exam. And part of that is, again, important to reinforce that the child is now in control. Before we even put hands on a child's body, there is much discussion that goes into, again, reassuring the caregiver and also reassuring the child. So what happens at the visit is first a discussion with the caregiver, which often is the non-offending caregiver, tends to be the mother. A medical history is obtained from the caregiver, and also expectations for the visit. So what does the provider expect to see that day, which really you don't expect to see physical findings on the exam, and I want the caregiver to understand that before we even do the child's checkup. We then speak to the child individually, if appropriate. I will say for the most part that would be more or less a 5-year-old and above, to see if they have any anxieties or concerns about what's going to happen today, what was their understanding about why they were brought in. And again, the child feels empowered during this visit and is also given context for why this is happening, is told that this is to make sure that your body is healthy after what happened. I will say that most kids do very well with this exam. It's not expected to hurt. Nothing goes inside of the body. It is not an invasive exam. And kids really understand and feel, again, empowered that their bodies are healthy after we do this examination. The good news is that most kids do have completely normal anatomy, even when we know sexual abuse has occurred. And so the important therapeutic part of the exam is to be told, guess what, your body is normal and healthy. No one would be able to tell what happened to you just by looking at you. And that can be, profound reassurance to the child, especially for an adolescent, and also to the caregiver as well. So after the physical exam is conducted, we also do testing. Testing would be for sexually transmitted infections as appropriate, and also pregnancy testing in a menstruating female. And And another aspect of the assessment is also to assess for the consequences of abuse, which is not so much physical findings on the child's body, but rather mental health symptoms. So it is important to do a comprehensive assessment of the situation of the child and their overall health and well-being after abuse has occurred. I want to highlight today that I have mentioned that most children have normal anatomy despite sexual abuse having occurred, and normal findings neither prove nor disprove the allegations. So in most circumstances, it doesn't necessarily help the investigation, I will say, but in my piece of the puzzle, I am personally not an investigator. So, you know, my goal specifically as a pediatrician is to make sure that the child feels reassured that their health is okay after this experience has occurred. And to conclude our visit, we also provide a treatment plan for each patient. The treatment really, in almost every single circumstance, is to make sure that the child, as best as we can, is connected to mental health services. Again, we know that most kids are not going to have medical defects, anatomical defects, or medical disease or infections after sexual abuse has occurred, but what most commonly occurs are mental health repercussions from the sexual abuse. And therefore, it's really important that during the visit, we hone in on the importance of mental health services for the child, of timely services. And if in the visit it is identified that the child has, for example, suicidal ideation or some other acute mental health symptoms, it is my job also to triage and make sure that child is receiving escalated care, which could be potentially being sent to DASH, which is one of our community resources for urgent mental health needs, and or possibly to the hospital for an emergency room evaluation if it's a very acute situation. So that's essentially the function of the medical exam. It's a one-time exam, with the exception of on some occasions we may call children back just for lab testing, but the purpose is really to provide reassurance for the caregiver, to provide reassurance to the child that their body is okay, their body is healthy, and that can be the first step in the therapeutic process and in healing for the child and the family, who often come to us at the CAC when in crisis. So this can be a very pivotal moment for them.
Thank you. So twice you mentioned child in control. You also mentioned empowerment and reassurance. So what happens if a child, when they come to the CAC that day and they don't want to have an exam? Can you explain sort of how that's addressed?
Yes, if they don't want the exam, I would like to explore why that is the case. Often if they don't want the exam, they're worried about something that we can usually figure out. But there are circumstances where the child just says, you know what, I don't feel comfortable. In some cases, that may be because they have their period that day or whatever it is. So I respect that, and we can reschedule. There is never a time where a child is forced or held down or restrained to conduct this examination. This is a trauma-informed exam, and we try to minimize trauma as much as possible, so there is never a circumstance where a child is pressured to have a physical exam in this context.
Okay, thank you. At this point, the case would progress to the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office. So, Raphael, would you like to discuss your role?
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to touch on something Dr. Hopgood said. I don't want her to sell short how important she is, because even when there's a negative finding, meaning there's normal anatomy, Dr. Hopgood's testimony, if we proceed to trial, is vital. Juries expect to see injuries to children when something like this happens. And one of our biggest challenges at trial is explaining to juries, well, no, it's normal. You wouldn't expect to find abnormal findings. And juries have routinely said to us that Dr. Hopgood's testimony has been vital in us securing the convictions that we get when we go to trial. So I just wanted to touch on how important her exam is to us. So when a case comes into the district attorney's office, this report, it comes in as either marked as an MDT or as some type of significant physical injury. And in this case, this is the sex abuse of a 14-year-old child. The district attorney's office intakes the case. That intake is either done by myself or one of my deputy bureau chiefs in the Child Abuse Bureau. That is either Lori Moroff or Amanda Burke. We make the initial assessment and we determine if there's anything that needs to be done immediately. We then immediately will contact SVU, Lieutenant Cassidy, or one of the sergeants on his teams. We will also reach out to CPS and the caseworker assigned to the case. Once the case is intake to the district attorney's office, we assign it out to a specific assistant district attorney in the Child Abuse Bureau, and or we also assign it to a special investigator in the district attorney's office. That is Maureen Gonzalez, and she's a former detective in SVU. The case then proceeds in the investigation phase, and our ADAs will monitor the case. The district attorney's office is available to assist the PD in all legal process. So in this case specifically, we will issue subpoenas. The subpoenas would be for maybe school records, medical reports. We also are available to the police department to prepare and assist in the preparation of any search warrants. And once again, in this case, we might be doing a search warrant on the vehicle because the allegation is some of the abuse occurred in, I believe, the subject's vehicle, and we would be looking for trace evidence. We would also potentially do search warrants for the home, for photos, to get cell phones or computer equipment, and there's an allegation of maybe some inappropriate internet material. All of the search warrant is contingent upon the district attorney's office and the PD establishing probable cause to search those items. We will immediately also reach out to the county attorney's office, maybe talk to Faith, and discuss how they're going to be proceeding on the case, because the district attorney's office, if we proceed into the courtroom, will have concurrent jurisdiction with the family court as well. If the police request assistance, then the district attorney's office is available to interview victims and any potential witnesses. All of the assistant district attorneys are forensically trained in the best practices, and if necessary, we will assist the police department. Now, if the police department determines there's probable cause to make an arrest, then they effectuate that arrest. We will consult with them on charges and how we would like to see the charges. But once an arrest is made, then the case gets transferred to the district attorney's office. This is an allegation, at least on paper, of a sex abuse of a 14-year-old girl. Assuming that those remain the allegations, and often that initial report is just the tip of the iceberg, and we will find much more serious charges. However, if it was just this allegation, it would get assigned to our district court bureau. Assuming, however, there are more serious allegations that would rise to the level of a felony, then the case would come into the Child Abuse Domestic Violence Bureau, and it would be assigned to a specific assistant district attorney. Usually it's the same assistant district attorney that has been handling the investigation. We will immediately have contact with the detective, which we probably already had contact with, and the defendant would initially be brought into our Central Islip courthouse for an arraignment. Assuming he is held or she is held on bail, and I will tell you that all sex offenses do remain bail eligible, then the case would get transferred into my bureau, and if held on bail, we have some statutory time limits on how quickly we have to present a case, if possible, to the grand jury, and that's usually about 5 days. So within 5 days, we will contact the detective, we will contact the victim and any necessary witnesses. We will bring them into the district attorney's office, we will conduct additional interviews, and we will bring them up into the grand jury to testify if appropriate. We have victim advocates in the district attorney's office. They will assist us in the interview process and offer any additional services that might be needed. We also have an emotional support dog named Tillman, who helps a lot with our young children. Assuming the case is indicted by a grand jury in Suffolk County, then the case gets transferred to the county court in Riverhead, and it remains in the the case pens before the county court judge. Suffolk County has a designated sex offense part. It's by Judge Valutis is the sex offense judge, and all sex offenses, whether or not they're children or adults, will be litigated in her part. We maintain, during the pendency of the case, close contacts with the PD. We continue the investigation. The grand jury is, as we say, just the beginning of the process. And we maintain close contact with the county attorney's office because they have concurrent jurisdiction. So there may be a family court matter proceeding at the exact same time at the criminal matter. The district attorney's office, at least on physical abuse cases, are a necessary party, and we may actually join in the county attorney's family court prosecution. We also maintain close contact with Dr. Hopgood. She is, as I will say, incredibly vital to us. She will consult with us, even on cases that she has not necessarily seen, even on our physical abuse cases. So it's a strong collaboration between all parties, and I will say that collaboration makes for very successful prosecutions. And very proud to say that the district attorney's office has a very high conviction rate of our physical and sexual abuse cases. And it's in large part due to this panel and how we work together.
Wonderful. I'm going to move to to Faith Lovell in the county attorney's office. So you get the floor.
Good morning, everyone. Okay. So the role of the county attorney, and specifically in our Family Court Bureau as a member of the MDT, and for all abuse and neglect cases, is to bring the matter to family court pursuant to Article 10 of the Family Court Act. So the beauty of the MDT is that everyone on this panel is speaking about the cases sometimes even before they go to court. Having said that, not every case goes to court. A case like this that's come in where you have a sex abuse case, typically what we would see is this matter would be referred to us, and as Annette said before, the timeframes are very fast. Annette and her team are going out, within hours to try to work on this case. We may have to go in same day or next day into family court to seek certain orders to make sure that the children are safe. So in family court, while we operate concurrently, the goal of a family court prosecution or a family court proceeding is very different than the goal of a criminal prosecution. So when we handle a case like this, we might see this come in as a request by the agency, by the Department of Social Services, for an immediate order of protection in favor of all of the children that are in this house. So what we might do is we would conference the case with the team, typically the abuse team, and we would try to get an emergency application before a judge as soon as possible to make sure that those children are safe. When you have a criminal prosecution, of course, if there is an order of protection in place, it's going to be for that victim child. But in this situation, there are also other children in the house, and we want to make sure that they're safe as well. So once we have an order of protection in place, we can ask the court to issue an order of protection not just against the child, not just for the child that was the victim of the abuse, but also that child's sibling or other child members of the household. Once we do that, we're going to find out a lot more information, and we are able to, within 10 days, file a petition in family court for abuse on behalf of the Department of Social Services against this stepfather. What's interesting about a family court prosecution is that there are more roles involved, and the children actually have their own attorneys that are representing them in family court. In a case like this, given the fact that there is a victim child and then other children who may have the same parent, a different parent, and one parent in common, there might actually be multiple attorneys for the children that are representing those children in court. Once we file a petition, as Raphael said, we have to keep in touch with the district attorney as well as all of the other members of the team for each court date so that we can figure out what the best resolution is for the family. So the goal in family court is to ensure the safety and the protection of the children, but also to assess and find an outcome for the family as a whole. And sometimes it's difficult for folks to understand that this person who may have done this sexual abuse may not be out of those children's lives forever. During the course of a family court proceeding, we're going to talk to the parties and the attorneys and the agency and in court to the judge about, number one, what type of services are necessary for any subject of a family court proceeding, including that offender, to get them to a place where perhaps there can be a relationship maybe with the other children. We are going to talk about visitation is something that we definitely spend a lot of time on in family court. Is there going to always be a stay-away order of protection? Is there going to be a possibility, again with the other children, that the father can see those other children? And it's going to be fluid based on all of the information that we find out over the course of the investigation and the prosecution. A person in family court who is accused of abuse is entitled to a fact finding. It does not go before a jury, it goes before the court, and you're actually going to hear from some of our judges a little bit later today. And what we are doing at disposition, at the outcome of a case, is we're trying to find out what's best for those children and those families going forward. So it may look like a final order where the Department of Social Services is going to monitor that person for a certain period of time. There may be services in place. There may be an order of protection that exists, and there are just several other outcomes. But the most important part with an MDT case is that the folks on this panel don't just talk about the case at the beginning. We talk about the case through the life of it. And as Raph said before, Dr. Hopgood is also a crucial part in our cases when we have to go to fact-finding, whether it's related to sexual abuse or physical abuse. Dr. Hopgood's testimony is really helpful to explain to the court why there might not be finding of sexual abuse, why there may be findings of physical abuse or things that look like physical abuse. So we continue to work with the team throughout the course of the case. On many cases, though, and I think it's helpful for folks to know that the county attorney is not always going to bring a case to court. There are many cases that come into the SCR that are handled by the Department of Social Services that do not require a petition to court. So we are bringing a petition to court when the safety of the children necessitates orders from the court in order to keep those children safe. But there are cases that we talk about in the MDT that may resolve with services provided by the agency, that may resolve based on the relationship between the child and the perpetrator just with a criminal prosecution, or may not need to be resolved with anything at all. So again, the beauty of the MDT is that we can talk about those cases, and we meet regularly, and we can talk about those cases even if there's not going to be a criminal arrest or a family court case, and we can make sure that the family and the children are protected.
Wow. So running a tight ship up here, I think we have about 7 minutes. We got for questions. We have questions that came through the app. I think Karen gave me a bunch of index cards. So to make things run a little bit smoothly, I gave some appropriate index cards over here because there were some questions about law enforcement and CPS. So I'm gonna hold you to a tight timeline here, so go.
Okay, I think that's working. So someone asked or indicated that when they called the hotline, they were told that when the case is closed, parents can gain access to the report. Is that true? Yes, that is 100% accurate. A parent can request a copy of their entire CPS case record. Mind you, there will be what's called redactions to that case record. The identity of the reporter is confidential and redacted, meaning that it's blacked out, so they would not see who the reporter was. Additionally, any other identifying information, because the reality is that if you're a school social worker and you make a report that says Johnny missed 42 days of school and is failing as a result, it's really hard to kind of, they do get the narrative. They're entitled to that. They're entitled to the progress notes. They're entitled to copies of the tools we use. We have computer-based tools to help us do assessments. We have a safety assessment. We have a risk assessment profile. They are entitled to that entire record. That also includes going forward, not just a CPS investigation. It could include an ongoing CPS case where we've opened a case for supervision or a foster care case. Further, and I think that counsel can discuss this in further length, that in court proceedings, records are provided as part of discovery, meaning that a respondent's attorney is going to ask for a copy of that case record to prepare their case. Also about records, one of the great things about working in this multidisciplinary model is it does give us the ability to more freely share in a much more timely manner. We also meet every other week to discuss the cases. So you see this group up here, we meet either in person, and there's additional people that are in the audience. If you attend MDT meetings, can you raise your hand? I know there's at least one down here. Michelle, you're not going to raise your hand? So there's a whole bunch. We have a whole group that sits around a table or sometimes a table on Zoom to talk about these cases. So the MDT process allows us to more freely and actively share information.
Okay. Would you like to take a question?
Question was, do the police accompany CPS workers in the field? The answer is, on an MDT, we will try to coordinate to be together, to conduct the interview together. This is where I will give CPS an extraordinary amount of credit for the places that they go where the police are not involved or do not go. CPS goes into some of the same houses that we go to responding on 911 calls. They go alone. And that's one of the areas that I will certainly, defer to CPS for the places that they do go to conduct interviews. But in terms of a joint response, it's with regards to the abuse team and a particular MDT, I'd say, marked case.
Okay. I think we had a question over here. If you could address one of those. Look at all the index cards.
The question is, do we record interviews in Suffolk County? The general answer is no. Suffolk County does not record interviews of their children, and there are exceptions. I'm not going to go deep into why and why not, but what I will tell you is that the interviews that are conducted, let's say at the CAC, if they are done, are not permitted under New York law to be introduced into a grand jury, and they aren't permitted to be used at trial, at least in replacing of the child's testimony for criminal matters. So they don't necessarily help us in the criminal prosecutions, and in some way they actually hinder us. New York's discovery law also doesn't necessarily protect those child interviews from being disclosed to the defense. We can, and we often do, seek protective orders, but there is nothing that requires a judge who will say they are not going to give the videotaped interview of a child disclosing some very intimate facts of what the defendant did to them to be disclosed to the defendant and given a copy of it, and potentially we have no control of what that child's videotape interview will happen. So that is some of the reasons we don't interview, and there are many more. But as a general rule, no, we do not video record interviews of children. Obviously, we record on paper what they say, but it's much different than a video interview.
All right, I think we're going to end it here. Thank you to this great panel. I hope that you got some additional information. And you may already know that Father Frank is not speaking today, so we are taking a break right now, and we thank you for your attention. Remember, there are boxes to put additional questions in, so thank you very much.
Please come back in 15 minutes. Thank you.
Go. I want to make you back.
to have the Suffolk County Executive Ed Romaine come on up to introduce our keynote speakers.
Thank you. We're going to talk about some of our keynote speakers, and Carolyn Gustoff, who worked at Bruce Well for many years, and now CPS, and Katie Beers. I think many of us, I'll turn it on. Okay. Thank you. I didn't know it was off. Well, we're very excited to have Carolyn Gustoff from CBS News, formerly News 12, and Katie Beers, who I think we all know the Katie Beers story for anyone that has followed Child Protective Services from 1992 when she was taken and put in really a cellar, a dungeon. And they're going to be our keynote speakers. And they're both authors of a book called Buried Memories. And Carolyn worked with Katie to write this book and talk what happens when the system doesn't always respond the way we would like it to respond. It turned out to be a good story at the end because she was rescued. She got a foster family that raised her, and she's here today to talk about her story, a story of survival and recovery from child abuse. It's an inspiration. And you know what? The one thing I've learned over many years is you can talk, and I see every day policy papers, I'm sure, our health commissioner, our social service commissioner, others, they see all these policy papers and information and statistics. Nothing tells a story like a personal situation that makes us understand the impact that sometimes government regulations or government action or inaction have. So I'm very pleased that Katie Beers has agreed to speak. I'm very glad that her co-author on Buried Memories have, and I'd asked them to come out on stage, and by the way, they signed the book.
Nice to see you, Ed.
Katie.
Yeah. Can you turn this off? Yes, you can turn that off. I agree. I applaud you. Okay. Thank you. Oh, I turned your mic off.
Yep. We're going to turn it over to these ladies that are going to tell us a personal story of survival and recovery and how it worked out. But before I did, we had a couple other challenge coins made up. One is for Carolyn.
Thank you.
Co-author. The other is for Katie.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Jennifer. And Jennifer and the people that helped organize this. Where is Sylvia? Sylvia, come on up here. And Kristen McKay. Kristen, where are you? I will leave you with this thought. It's easy to be county executive when you have workers like this standing behind you. And I will leave you with one other thought. Together, all of us, share it, working together. Let's see if we can build a better system to protect our children. God bless you. Thank you for what you do. And I'm going to turn it over to these co-authors that are going to talk about buried memories and make us think long and hard how we can build a better system that will serve everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ed.
Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Good. I am in Gulp, my 40th year as a television news reporter. And as such, people always ask me, what's your favorite story? What's your best news story you've ever covered? Well, it seems like a simple enough question, right? But that always stumps me. To me, it's like asking a prosecutor, what's your favorite crime? or a first responder, what's your favorite disaster? It's kind of hard to say. But I actually do cover good news. I cover great news. Inspirational, strong, resilient people who make a difference in our world and in our communities. Okay, just last month, I covered the teacher who saved a sixth grader's life with the Heimlich maneuver, and then taught the class how they could save lives also by learning certain skills. Then there was the all-girls Eagle Scout group. They are bravely breaking barriers and helping a whole lot of people in the process. And then actually the most popular story I've had in a very long time, 1.5 million views on my social media, the neglected turtle that grew a beak like a duck and was sent to the turtle rescue of the Hamptons, where he is now living his best life with volunteers who filed down the beak and are rehabbing him because life, even wildlife, is precious. So every month, every day, I seek out and share positive news, and there is an abundance of it if you just look for the good around us. But, as you know, I also cover plenty of bad news. A lot of heartbreaking tragedy. If my photographer and I are knocking on your door uninvited, it is probably not a good thing. I covered the best and the worst of life, two ends of the spectrum of this ongoing drama of humanity. And I do truly hope that by sharing these often tragic stories, we can all live and learn and aspire to do better. So the story of Katie Beers turns out to be both of these, the worst and the best of human nature. It didn't start out that way. It began on December 29th, 1992, with all the makings of a tragedy. I showed up at work at 7 o'clock in the morning and I was handed a fax from the Suffolk Police Department that said, "Unusual incident." It turned out to be the understatement of the year. A child, 9-year-old Katie Beers, was missing from a game arcade under circumstances evincing an abduction, it said. So that was the start of a mystery that would consume the next days, weeks, and months of my career. It became one of the most compelling sagas in New York criminal history, and it would become a national obsession as details would emerge daily of Katie's shockingly abusive pre-kidnapping life. As I knocked on doors and spoke with her seemingly devastated godmother and oddly absent biological mother, I learned there was also a grown man who would spend time, a lot of time with Katie, Big John he was called, and that he was with Katie last, police said. He had taken her to a game arcade in Nesconset, he told police, for her birthday, and he claimed that she just vanished from the arcade, that he picked up his head and she was just not there anymore. I also learned that Big John would spend a lot of time around children, mostly boys. A single man in his 40s, his house was like a fun house for kids, filled with candy, toys, games, and he would often shower them with gifts. He even took Katie's brother on a trip to Disney World. Unchaperoned children congregated there with him daily, and no one seemed to bat an eye. There was also the godmother's husband, Sal. Katie lived with all of them, her biological mom and grandmother, Sal, and the godmother, Linda, all together in West Islip because money was so tight. And I also learned that Sal was facing child sex abuse charges related to the now missing Katie. There was truly no shortage of people in this circus-like cast of characters. It was like an unsavory game of Clue. Everyone appeared to have a motive to kidnap or harm the now missing Katie. I also began learning that Katie's young life, and you didn't have to be an investigative reporter to see, she had fallen through so many cracks, it was hard to fathom. And there's Katie right in the middle, smiling. She rarely went to school. When she did, she was sent home for repeated cases of head lice, inappropriate clothing for the weather, no shoes, no coat in the winter, dirty knots in her hair. There were laundromat workers I spoke with who often saw Katie for a number of years, they told me, now mind you, she's only 9 years old, doing the household laundry and all of the shopping chores, getting them breakfast and pizza, and with hardcore instructions. If she somehow failed to follow, she would appear in the subsequent days with bruises, and she had no friends of her own. She was 5, 6 years old, drinking coffee, shopping for the family's cigarettes, candy, and soda. Known to the whole strip mall in West Islip as the unkempt girl with yellow teeth nicknamed Dirty Katie. I spoke with one neighbor who admitted that Katie once meekly hinted that she was being touched in a sexual way by Sal. The woman said, of course, she couldn't go to police or the courts. She had her own legal problems, and she assumed that schools were doing something about it. I learned that CPS had been to Katie's house at least twice, and in one visit, the godmother, Linda, quote, chased the caseworker out. Astonishingly, Katie continued to live in the same house where the reported alleged neglect and abuse was taking place. Her mother was working 2 jobs as a cab driver. She was the only one earning a living, but was too busy to notice what seemed apparent to everyone else, that Katie was a profoundly abused and neglected child. As I wrote in the book, Buried Memories with Katie, 20 years after her rescue, for a dog, someone would have called the pound. For Katie, no one seemed to know what to do. The utter lack of response to what was seemingly an obviously neglected child was mind-boggling. It was as if an entire community had witnessed a hit and run, turned its collective head, and kept driving. After 7 days of a frantic, multi-state search for missing Katie Beers, Big John could keep it in no longer. He knew where Katie was, and she was alive. And he went to his lawyer, who called the media, then went to police. For those who may not be familiar with the story, all the details, I'll show you the photos. It's truly stunning, the extent that Big John went, John Esposito, to keep Katie hidden in plain sight. He had built an underground vault that would never have been found had little Katie not convinced him to give himself up. He had built it underground behind his Bayshore house, accessible only by a very complicated series of actions. A bookcase had to be pulled out from the wall on wheels. Then behind that bookcase, in a closet, if you knew to roll up the carpet, you would find a 200-pound cement slab that could only be moved with a special crank contraption. And then that exposed an underground narrow tunnel to a soundproof chamber the size of a small closet, 6 by 6, with a smaller coffin-sized box within it. And if you look at the picture, I'm talking about the box to the left. That's where Katie was hidden for 17 days, chained by her neck and hands. Here, she was kept isolated, cold, in darkness. Her only human interaction was with a flickering TV and Big John, who would come down to feed her, tell her he would keep her there for the rest of her life, marry her, have children with her, and every day sexually molest and rape her. In writing the book, I was given access to never before and never again heard tapes that he made in the dungeon, audio tapes. Big John was actually recording Katie in captivity. It is truly gut-wrenching to hear her soulful cries for help, someone to please let her out. But I also got a rare glimpse into the twisted mind of a pedophile. His conversations with Katie are all recorded. He was at once predator and, in his mind, trying to be her protector. And little Katie outwitted him and saved her own life. We would later learn that he built this dungeon, this torture bunker, specifically for Katie, to rescue her, he said, from her sad home life. In full view of neighbors, even Katie later remembered that she saw him build it. When Katie was found alive, it was not exactly the moment you would expect of great relief for her, of an immediate rushing away from her evil captor. She will talk more about that, but for now, suffice it to say, there was a lack of understanding back in 1992 of some of the things that we take for granted today about the impact of sex abuse on child victims. There was, of course, great public curiosity about what condition Katie could possibly be in. The public had been rooting for her throughout her disappearance. She had become America's sweetheart. All were rooting for her to be alive and well. But James Catterson, the Suffolk DA at the time, made an impassioned plea: give Katie a chance. A plea to journalists like me to essentially stand down. Let Katie, now removed from her mother and her godmother, let her live out her childhood in anonymity and peace. And that's exactly what happened. Fast forward 20 years. I did the math. Katie would be all grown up. The story of how we connected is in our book, Buried Memories. But what I discovered upon finally meeting her is that resilience and recovery from the worst conceivable upbringing is possible, and that people who are in the position to intervene and facilitate change can truly work miracles. In collaborating with Katie on the book, I learned that CPS had been to Katie's house on multiple occasions. She was asked questions. She was so afraid of Sal, who was sexually abusing her from the age at least of 3, she lied, and there was no follow-up. Katie, I would learn, was subjected to far more sexual abuse than any of us could have imagined before the kidnapping. Red flags were waving all around her. And in a new setting, placed now with a loving East End foster family and a slew of new siblings, some of them also foster children. For the first time in her life, she was able to sit with a family for dinner. She was provided a toothbrush, a comfortable bed, rules and ethics and values, a framework for a far, far better life. Her new community included skilled and a loving therapist who specialized in child abuse, and caring protective teachers and caseworkers, and this photo doesn't begin to include all of them. There was a whole team behind Katie, a whole community, and as Katie flourished in this much-needed anonymity, her astounding story inspired much-needed change. The Suffolk Child Advocacy Center opened in 1997. It was a revolutionary concept at the time to spare children like her having to repeat details of their ordeal over and over and over again, as she had to investigators in frightening locations, in police stations, in the hospital, even feet away from her abuser and abductor. Hearings and a grand jury report would find fault with CPS at the time for having lax monitoring, shoddy record keeping, poorly trained caseworkers, police, and the DAs were not even sharing information on sex abuse cases at the time. Better collaboration and documentation was implemented. Katie would fade away from the headlines, but she left behind a legacy that would mean the children who came after her would have a better chance. Fast forward again to 2020. I would find myself covering another house of horrors. This time it was a little Suffolk County boy, and in this case it was too late. 8-year-old Tommy Valva, who had autism, was dead, frozen in his family's unheated garage, forced to sleep there as punishment for bedwetting. His very name causes us all to lower our heads in sorrow. I know no one in this room needs me to repeat the shameful details of this travesty. But yet, all of the same unthinkable questions came flooding back to me. Years of complaints, who knew what and when? With all of the state's now mandated reporting rules, how could another child fall through the cracks? Thomas's teachers had filed 11 reports with the state. He and his brother often came to school bruised, dirty, hungry, soaked in urine. Thomas told the teacher he was sleeping in the garage. He ate food out of the trash, crumbs from the floor. Another thick, grand jury report, and months ago, another 20 recommendations for change. So is everything now fixed? Well, I'm no expert. My only skill is in eliciting responses from those with the power to make change. But what I'm told by those closest to the system of reporting suspected abuse is that there is still a long way to go. But now, there is truly determination to make a difference like I have never seen before. Are caseloads lower? Well, not enough. The goal is 12. At this writing, there are caseworkers, maybe even in this room, with more than 15 and a handful with more than 20. Are the people who are needed to tackle this extraordinarily important and difficult life-saving job motivated and appreciated and paid appropriately? The county has brought in outside consultants to review salaries, raise salaries, and hire more caseworkers. Is there transparency? Can journalists like me follow up on unfounded abuse reports to know specifically what went wrong in a case like Tommy Balva? No. I'm pretty good at reporting on problems and the ensuing tragedies, but finding solutions is much, much harder. But this truly is a huge start. We're here together at one conference, laser focused on this issue, spearheaded by a county executive and county leaders who are genuinely motivated to make a difference, to heal from the Balva trauma and plot a course correction so that stories like end, more of these tragedies end like Katie Beers did. Katie went on to a small liberal arts college and earned a bachelor's degree in business management and accounting. There, she met a man. There she met a man she would fall in love with and marry. She and husband Derek have 2 children. This is quite old. They are now 15 and 13. And Katie is busy as a working mom with a career in insurance, and she shares her story often to inspire people to know that change is possible. People are not defined by the sometimes horrific circumstances they were born into. Abuse and neglect replaced with caring and community can rewrite an entire life. Katie's story that began with so much ugliness and pain has evolved into a beautifully uplifting one. Katie's strength, her spirit, her heart have taught me and countless others about resilience, and that action by the right people at the right time can truly turn a child's life around. Every child deserves the second chance that Katie got. Every child deserves a shot at a happy ending. What you in this child protective community do is a calling, and it is life-saving. So yes, the story of Katie Beers is both the worst and the best story I have ever covered, and it is also my favorite. I am proud to introduce my friend and hero, Katie Beers.
Thank you all so much for coming, for holding this conference. Literally got teary-eyed up here on my own story, because hearing about my own childhood doesn't faze me anymore because I lived it. But looking at the recovery, the life that I'm able to have now, that is what always gets me, thinking about my children, my husband, the fact that I was able to move on and have a seemingly normal life. Obviously, my childhood did not start off that way, as Carolyn explained. So as a child, I had Child Protective Services in my house quite a few times. I would go to school unkempt, visible bruises on me, not able to speak about what was going on, because also in school, they didn't teach about the horrors that could happen behind closed doors. So for somebody like me, I didn't know that it was okay for me to say these things. I had a perpetrator in my house that was telling me that I could not speak of these things. So when Child Protective Services eventually would come and interview me, they would interview me in the bedroom where the abuse was actually occurring. I would be sitting on the bed where the abuse was occurring because the caseworkers thought that that was a comfortable place for me to be, sitting on the bed in this room. Obviously, that was not the case, and in my head, I had the perpetrator telling me that I'm not allowed to tell anybody about what's going on, that I'm not allowed to share these things. So I wouldn't share these things. I would say that everything was okay. And behind closed doors, I was enduring physical, verbal, sexual abuse every day. So now, as an adult, looking back on my childhood, I know that there have been movements made. There are child advocacy centers all over the state and the country that have come about after my case, so that way children have a safe place to discuss what's going on. They're taken out of the situation. They feel more comfortable about talking about what's going on. A lot of times people want to, in my case, they want to fault Child Protective Services completely on my case and for me falling through the cracks. I have never felt that way. Because I was not truthful with my story. I was not able to share or speak about the things that were going on because I did not know that that was okay. So I've always said that it starts with education in the school system. It starts with teaching children that it's okay to talk about these things, that you need to be able to feel comfortable sharing these stories with whomever it is that you're comfortable with, whether it's a friend's parent, a teacher, somebody in the school district. For me, I didn't really feel comfortable sharing those things. I didn't feel comfortable in the situations that I was in where I should have been comfortable sharing my story. Now, out of my story, my terrible childhood, I was able to come out on the other side of things. And I will 100% credit that to my foster parents. My foster parents who were screened through Children Protective Services. They were chosen for me. I went in and lived with them when I was 10 years old. And it's the household that I should have had from the beginning. I like my story because I'm able to share the horrors of what I grew up with, what I went through. I can talk for a long time about the system and the people that have failed me, but that's not the point of my story. The point of my story is that when I was able to get help, that I was able to start therapy, live in a household with 2 wonderful parents. I had siblings. I had people that I felt safe with. I was in an environment that I felt safe in. And I was able ultimately to recover and turn my story around because of those things. If it wasn't for the foster family and the therapy that I had gone through, my upbringing and where I'm at now would be completely different. I know that we're here to talk about the Child Protective Service system and social services and the revamps that need to be made. Obviously, as times change, as you're presented with social media and all of these other things that children now have access to that I didn't have access to, obviously things do need to change. There are a lot of things that can be done, and I think first and foremost is educating children that they are okay to share these things and share anything that they're uncomfortable with their teachers, with anybody. Sorry, I'm still getting emotional. But the Child Protective Services, they ultimately, for me, ended up being my hero after I was abducted and found. I always say that the best thing that happened to me was being abducted. And the reason being is because then it was truly brought to light about what was going on behind the closed doors of my house. If it wasn't for the abduction, then I would not have gotten the help that I so greatly needed. I think that I probably would have continued to move on with my life, with not sharing my story, with not telling about the horrors that were going on behind closed doors. I think we're gonna do a Q&A. That is always my favorite part of talking, because I could talk to you guys about my entire upbringing. But you guys are here, I think, to learn and to ask questions and to figure out things that will help to change or make the system better. So I think if it's okay, that we'll move on to that portion. Yep.
Yep, this is on. Thank you, Katie. And I think we probably need tissues back here as well. So you are not alone in that, myself included. So there's going to be two of us. We're going to run up the aisle. If you have a question, please just raise your hand and we'll come to you. We think that'll make that easier. So if anyone has a question for Katie and Carolyn. I saw this one first.
First, thank you for being here and sharing your story for all of us. So for me, I believe your story is one of just incredible human resilience. Was there a moment that you can recall where you went, aha, I'm okay? And what was that moment like for you, and how can we replicate that for other kids to create that environment?
I was probably, honestly, a teenager before I had my aha moment that I'm safe. Now, I was safe with my foster family, but I was still going through the trial of Sal Angaleri, who was sexually abusing me or had sexually abused me. I was still going through preparing at the DA's office for the trial against John Esposito, who had abducted me. My biological mother was still trying to gain custody of me. And I think, honestly, that might have been the thing that scared me the most, was going back into a household with my biological mother, because I didn't know prior to going into foster care what a home was supposed to feel like. I didn't know that there was neglect going on. So I think when somebody finally explained to me that, yes, she's trying to get you back, but it's very highly likely that that's not going to happen, that's when I think I had my point where I was able to breathe and able to move on with my childhood.
Other questions?
Diana, we have a question right here. Stand up.
Thank you again for sharing your story. It requires so much courage, which you need to be commended for, both of you.
Thank you.
My question is, now that you are an adult, what strategies do you use? And I don't mean to make it sound so clinical, but it could be informal things for self-care, to be able to sometimes when those memories may come back, how you're able to stay present and grateful, but also deal with the triggers to move forward into a more positive adult life?
I would have to say that my husband helped greatly with helping me deal with my triggers and dealing with the uncertainties. I mean, it's definitely not easy for anybody to be friends with or in a relationship with somebody that's gone through all of these traumas. Thank God again for the therapy that I went through, for my foster parents, for them letting me know that I'm in a safe environment. There are still some triggers that I'll have every now and again. They fortunately have gotten less and less over time. And I've just learned to just separate myself from the position that I'm in, from the circumstances that I'm in, and just take a minute for myself so I can just breathe. Thankfully, I've learned coping skills and mechanisms to deal with that through therapy. So I'm self-aware of the self-care aspect of dealing with it.
Any questions on this side? I don't want to miss hands.
I think we have a question back here.
Hi, thank you for being here. Could you clarify the duration of therapy and the type of therapy you received over the years and how early it was before you started that?
So I went immediately into therapy, probably like the second week of being in foster care. It was very important for that to start immediately. The first therapist that I saw was a child therapist. And while she was fantastic, I wasn't dealing with childhood problems. I wasn't dealing with normal childhood trauma. So my foster parents pretty quickly changed gears and found a different therapist that was still in our town of East Hampton, who was more capable of dealing with a child that had been through such severe sexual abuse and the other traumas that I endured. She stood by me through the trial against Sal Angaleri. She was with me a lot of times when I was talking with the district attorney, dealing with the case against John Esposito, and I actually continued to see her until I was 18. I still now have a very close relationship with her, so I talk to her on a regular basis as well.
But I also could add that at first, Katie's therapy was geared towards the fact that you were being prepared to testify.
Yes.
That was initially, as the prosecutor nods in the third row, yes, Bill was very close to this case. I mean, so the purpose, I believe, if I'm correct, is that Katie was being prepared for being a witness against both Sal Angaleri and the kidnapper, John Esposito. And then it ended up being something that even after Katie bravely testified, and I'll never forget on the cover of the New York Post was the courage of Katie when she took the stand. This little waif, stood up to Sal Angaleri and stared him down and told a courtroom and a judge what he did. And after that, Mary Bromley, the therapist, who's still in practice in East Hampton, used all sorts of techniques like art to help Katie deal with her trauma. And also what was very pivotal, I don't even know if you remember, but she brought a man, another victim, who had been also oddly buried alive in an underground tomb for a number of days and survived, obviously. And he came and spoke with Katie in therapy, and they had so much in common, and they bonded, and I think that was also, do you remember that?
Harvey, absolutely.
Harvey.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I think that in therapy, they really used all sorts of techniques throughout her childhood, and then it became more mundane teenage things. But, you know, very early on, there was this very mindful approach to, you know, helping Katie, A, survive her ordeal, but B, survive being put on the stand to face her accusers.
I actually
To face her abusers, excuse me, abusers.
Harvey actually, through my therapy sessions with him, Harvey Weinstein, who has passed away, I want to say maybe a decade ago, it was actually through one of the therapy sessions with him that I had realized that I had actually played in the underground bunker when it was being built. When it was just a hole in the ground, my brother and I were literally like jumping in there and jumping out and just playing in it when I was 8 years old. So I had that memory when I was dealing with Harvey, and I actually met his son maybe like 8 years ago in LA. So that was a neat experience.
Yeah, but
too.
meeting somebody else who had been through a similar trauma, even though he was, you know, decades older than her, was very helpful, I think.
Yes, absolutely. I think we helped each other a lot.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for honoring us with your story. It's a more personal question, but as a mother of a survivor and being a survivor, how did you approach the subject with your sons about surviving sexual trauma? Like, how did you, like, what age was it that you began to provide that psychoeducation to them without projecting your own fears onto them as well?
So we started writing Buried Memories. The one picture Carolyn shared, I was actually very newly pregnant with my son, Logan, who's now 15. We started traveling or doing media for the book when Logan was 4,
Right,
and Haley was 2.
had just been born, I think, yeah.
So they were very, very young. So fortunately, they, part of their childhood was mom going away for a couple of days and working, whether it be for media or doing speeches and things like that. So it wasn't necessary for me to explain things to them too early, so I was able to do it on my own time. Logan was maybe around 7 or 8 when I had told him that I was abducted. And I started with the very broad explanation of what happened to me. Obviously didn't go into anything in detail, but just I started as their ages were appropriate. He's more intrigued with my story than my daughter is. So I share with him when he has questions. I'm always very open with him. I want him to ask questions because it's also a learning experience for him about what happened to me and about the horrors that there are out there. One of the things that I've tried really hard not to be is a helicopter parent, and I think with anybody, that's very, very difficult. So I've always kept my children very close and have been very guarded with who they're around.
When, Katie, did you have a discussion about their body being, you know, their own domain and for no one else, you know, without their consent?
We started broaching those topics with them when they were very young. Just obviously, just here and there, just making sure that they knew that if anything ever, God forbid, happened or they felt uncomfortable, that we wanted to make sure in any situation that they felt comfortable talking to us. Even if it was a situation where they didn't want somebody driving them home because they felt uncomfortable in the car, I wanted them to know that they were able to come to us and tell us these things. So we started when they were really young, just so they would know that we are a safe space for them.
We have a question up here in the mezzanine.
So first of all, Carolyn, thank you for bringing the story, and that you can be here to share this story 32 years after you covered it initially. But particularly Katie, thank you for your courage, your strength, and teaching us. My question, since in this audience there are people who really do believe that reunification is the hallmark. And as a child psychiatrist, I've worked with many children for whom I've advocated termination of parental rights, often at odds with social services and the courts. So given how powerful that anxiety was when you were worried that you might be returned to your mom, could you tell us how important it was that parental rights were terminated and you were allowed to remain with your foster parents?
That I actually do not think that Marilyn's parental rights were ever terminated. I think she, if I remember correctly, I think she fought to regain custody of me until I was 18. And then at that point in time, I still continued to live with my foster family. But in my case, absolutely her parental rights should have been taken away, probably pretty early on. Because it was, as a child, it was stressful for me knowing that she was going to court to try to get custody back of me. And so that would always be a point of a lot of anxiety for me growing up, even as a later teenager. While I think in a lot of cases family reunification is appropriate and great, in my situation it was not. I have said in my adult life now, realizing that Marilyn did neglect me horribly as a child, and that's what led to a lot of the instances of abuse or the capability of that happening. She should have really never had custody of myself or my biological half-brother. There were a lot of red flags with him as well. He didn't go to school a lot. I think he dropped out of school when he was 16, and that was acceptable at that point in time because she signed off on it. But in situations that I grew up in with the neglect and the abuse in the household, and her not taking me out of the household where she knew the abuse was occurring, it should have never been on the table.
And interestingly, you continued, and to this day, continue to have contact with her, or not recently? I know you continued through your teenage years having visits, and you were never really thrilled about those, but you did it.
When I was probably 15 or 16 and started getting involved in sports, visitation dwindled down drastically. When I was then 18, I was allowed to see her whenever I wanted, which was not very often. I've been with my husband for 20 years, and she's met him a handful of times. She has not met my 13-year-old daughter. She's met my son once when he was 18 months old. I have finally chosen for myself to not have a relationship with her and not try to have a relationship with her, because I've just finally realized that it was very toxic. Giving up that relationship with her, I also gave up a relationship with my biological brother, who I also have not seen in probably, or talked to in probably 7 or 8 years.
It's on. Yep. Yep, just takes a, okay. Hello. I really find you very powerful and fantastic person, and I really appreciate hearing your story.
Thank you.
I work with many, many women who've had significant histories, and I work with them and their children. And it comes from my perspective, my question, which has to do with, there's an article called Ghosts in the Nursery, which is all about when there's a parent who has a very challenging childhood of abuse and neglect, that when you then have children, that it can reemerge and be very much present in the nursery with you. And I actually find that that is something that not just a parent with a neglectful and abusive background, but as a parent myself, I find that. So I'm just wondering, when you became a parent, did you find that that actually did occur? And if so, what kind of support were you able to get to address those kinds of re-traumatizing of these past experiences?
Part of my recovery was being able to distance myself with my childhood. So while I talk about my childhood, and it is present with me every day, the abuses that I went through and everything else, I, through being able to go through therapy, have chosen to not have that be forefront on my mind. Now, of course, I went through it when my daughter was about 2 years old. I had a memory that that's about when my abuse had started, when I had started being sexually abused. And so her being 2 years old was a little rough and triggering for me for a little bit. Fortunately, my husband is very, he's a very big presence and knows, obviously, all about my childhood. So he was able to help me navigate those things while I wasn't going to therapy any longer. At that point, I at least had him to talk to and rely on heavily.
Good afternoon, Katie and Carolyn. Thank you so much for sharing decades later the story. One of the things I picked up on is you indicated that when you were interviewed, and you were interviewed in a horrific environment where the abuse was occurring, looking back and putting yourself back to that time, do you think there was anything that caseworkers might have been able to do that you may be able to suggest to try to get to the truth when it appears to me you were horrifically in a circumstance? Was it fear? Was it anything that you think that might have been able to make a difference that you might be able to suggest today? Thank you.
I strongly think that if I was taken out of the household where the abuse was occurring and interviewed, talked to in a different location, or even not the bedroom where it was occurring, I think that I would have been able to be a little bit more forthcoming. And I do know that with the child advocacy centers, they are now doing that. They're taking the kids out of the households, bringing them to a place that's geared toward children so they feel more safe in sharing their stories. My situation was just one of those anomalies that it was the perfect storm for me not feeling comfortable sharing what was going on. The caseworker, I think, truly thought that they were doing the best thing by bringing me into a secure room where nobody else was so they could interview me with nobody being able to overhear and things like that. They just chose, unfortunately, in that house, the very particular wrong room.
I mean, it's a real conundrum because if you're being abused and terrified by this, really frightening person, and he was a big, frightening man, I don't know what the strategies are to getting the truth from a child, but clearly Katie did not feel safe revealing it to anyone at the time. And then the one time she did utter it to a neighbor, the neighbor washed their hands of it. And I also alluded in my talk to a second time that Katie was, felt very uncomfortable. If you want to just talk briefly, Katie, about when you were ultimately rescued, in the moments later, you were placed also in a situation which you look back and kind of shake your head.
So After John Esposito had told the police that he had had me, police came to the house and were recovering me. One of the things that I had done with John to try to get him to think about what he was doing, to try to get him to release me, to, I don't know, try to manipulate him in some way, was trying to ask him, well, what's going to happen when I'm older? I want to go to school. I want to graduate college. I want to get a job. I want to have children. And he always had answers to those. I wouldn't have to work because he would have enough money. I would marry him. I would have children with him. So the day that of the rescue, the police came down into the dungeon, and it was just, I believe, 2 male officers, if I remember correctly. And I had this terrible, fearful moment that maybe John was trying to manipulate me in some way, that maybe these people were here to abuse me in some capacity. It took me a minute to realize that I was safe, or that I felt like I was safe. The door to the dungeon was open. I realized it was open. I hightailed it out of there. Then there was a man up at the top that was helping me out. So in this situation, it was all a lot of men. I think there was one woman present on this day, at least that I recall. But while they were waiting for the police car to get into the driveway to come take me out, they sat me in the room with John Esposito. I was probably this close to him, and I was actually, I don't recall this, but I was told that I actually took an opportunity to go over to him and talk to him and tell him that it was going to be okay. I don't recall that. I do recall being in the room with him and sitting very close with him for what seemed like ever.
Right. Yeah. So I think, there's a lot of moments that we can all learn from Katie's story.
Hi. I had, sorry. Go ahead. Oh, okay. From a legal point of view, and I'm a lawyer, so I think of things meanly and cold-heartedly, but do you feel that going to trial, especially as a child, was that a cathartic thing? Was it, obviously it was difficult, but could you talk a little bit about what you felt the legal system either brought or took away from for you?
So I only had to testify against Salangaleri, fortunately. I still had to share my story and what happened with John Esposito, which I actually did not share all of that after being found. It wasn't until his parole hearing in 2006 that I shared some additional information. But honestly, the district attorney's office, when we were doing the interviews with them and preparing for the court, they made it as pleasant of an experience as they could have, given the topics that we were discussing. So I never felt unsafe or like I had to share on any given day with them. I think there were days that I had gone into the DA's office and I just didn't talk. I think I colored in the district attorney's office. I remember he brought me out for ice cream one day because I just didn't want to talk. And they made it comforting in a way. They weren't, while they had a job to do, they had to get things done. They also weren't pressuring me to talk about more than what I felt comfortable talking about. So for me, that was, I would say, absolutely helpful.
And I feel that everything in the case was really geared for Katie's future, not to make it any worse for Katie. I think that there was an attempt to get Sal to plead guilty so that it would spare Katie having to testify, even though it would have meant a relatively short sentence for him. In the case of John Esposito, he did plead guilty, and that was all to spare Katie. So, I mean, as an adult, in hindsight, you know, they probably didn't serve, although John Esposito ended up dying in prison after finally confessing to sexually abusing Katie on the very day that he finally admitted that. He was later found dead. But all of it was to protect Katie, and you know, clearly we see the results. So, you know, there was a trade-off there. I think that most prosecutors in the case, and certainly the district attorney at the time, would agree, you know, that the goal was to spare you any more trauma.
Absolutely.
Carolyn, thank you so much for being here and for helping to share Katie's story with such compassion. We do appreciate that. Katie, thank you so much for your bravery. We appreciate that as well. My question to you is this. We have such a shortage of foster parents here in Suffolk County. You talk with such kindness and love about your foster parents. What would you say to a couple or anybody in Suffolk County who was thinking about becoming a foster parent?
That's a good question. I definitely think that it takes a special couple or special person to become a foster parent. I will tell you, I absolutely put my foster parents through hell in my teenage years. I'm not going to deny that. But they were fantastic and never wavered. But my foster parents had had a couple children before me. One of them they ultimately adopted, and then I was their last one and probably their most stressful. But they just had this love and compassion that they wanted to share, and they knew that they needed to share it. I definitely think that it takes just a special person. I don't think that anybody or everybody could be a foster parent, and there are a lot of people that shouldn't be capable of being a foster parent. I've heard stories from people that I know directly that have been in the foster care system where they've had horrible experiences, possibly worse experiences in the foster homes than they did in their biological homes that they were coming from. So I definitely, there needs to be, I think, more training and more resources for the parents and the families that the foster children are going into.
Okay, so we don't have any time for questions, but what we wanted to do in front of everyone is, Phil, I'm sorry to do this to you, but we wanted to reunite the prosecutor who put away Katie's, and he's been emotional all day, and this is just something that really needs to happen.
Now, they didn't go into foster care, they went to my mother's, and I ended up in the focus program and family treatment court again because, like I said, I had relapsed, and when I drink alcohol, I'm a blackout drunk, and I blacked out one day, the cops came because my kids were scared, and CPS got involved. So, yeah, but I am in school now. I utilized, I'm pretty sure everyone knows about Access VR. I don't know if you ever heard of that program. So I am in school right now. I'm going for medical, office administration, billing and coding through Hunter Business School. You know, I'm back home with my family. I have, you know, a lot of those bridges I burned, I've started to gain back, so that's it.
What would you say was the best thing about the Family Treatment Court Focus Program?
So I printed out, I was trying to think of answers this morning. Honestly, the best thing was definitely, I worked one-on-one with Marion Silverman. I've known her since 2020, and she has taught me a lot about, I'm freezing, sorry. To start taking accountability for my own actions, you know, not to let my children, you know, let them feel how they feel without getting stressed out. I know there's like a whole wino culture out there of mothers who think, you know, at the end of the day, they're going to drink wine because their kids stress them out all day. And I don't let that get to me anymore. I don't let my kids get to that point. Like, be gentle with their feelings. My children had trauma as well, from what I put them through with the alcoholism and having to go live with my mother for like almost a year. I was in inpatient treatment. I was in Morningstar, which was another great thing for me. But just being there for me. Like, I would call Marion and she would have like one-on-one counseling sessions with me and like talk me through like when I was feeling stressed out, if the kids were misbehaving. And building that bond back between my children and I, that helped a lot, just being able to go there. My 8 and my 9-year-old now, loves her. When I told him this morning that I was coming to see Marion, he's like, oh, can I go? Can I go? I miss her, absolutely loves Marion. And yeah, that was what was different this time. In 2020, I didn't really focus on that. I pretty much just, went through the program and didn't absorb anything that was taught to me like I was this time.
How would you characterize your experience with Child Protective Services, and is there anything that you think they could do better?
So I actually had an amazing caseworker who was non-judgmental and very understanding, and she was very knowledgeable on the disease of addiction. So I didn't have any complaints this time around, and she was amazing. I guess, when I was in Morningstar, there were other women in there with me that did not have the same experience. Their CPS workers were not as understanding, very judgmental. They couldn't talk to them. I was very open. I could talk to my caseworker about anything. It felt very comfortable, and maybe just more education about the disease of addiction. I don't know how it works. I don't know if they already have that, but I feel like maybe that could help out a lot, is more education about the disease of addiction.
Thank you. And what piece of advice would you give others who are involved in the child welfare system with Child Protective Services?
Okay. I turned it off. There we go. Okay. All right. So I wrote this one down too. Honestly, which is another thing I didn't do in 2020, is to take this time to truly work on, yourself. Don't have expectations. I didn't have my parents. I didn't have my partner. They were very angry at me, and I was pregnant while I was going through treatment. And just don't build that sober support network. Have others in your life. Don't rely on everyone, family-wise. They may not be there for you. Work on your triggers, any past trauma, how to cope with life in a healthy way. And the biggest thing is learn how to love yourself so you can be there 100% for your children.
Thank you. And finally, how are your children, Gavin, Damien, and Fia?
They are doing great. So I'm very happy to say that the baby, as long as I stay sober a day at a time, I do have a 12-step fellowship program that I'm in. I have a sponsor. I'm very active in it. She'll never have to see her mom as an alcoholic, a day at a time. And thank you. And the boys are doing great. My older one, he has an IEP. He was in self-contained classes from kindergarten until this year. This year he went into ICT and are doing amazing. I'm so proud of him, as well as my 9-year-old. The relationship we have is so different than when it was before I went into the treatment program again this time, way different. And I feel it, there's less fighting, there's less stress in the house, less tension, and I know it's because I've worked on myself. And that's why they're behaving the way they are, because they see a change in me. And that's huge.
Thank you. Well, I can tell you, I'm very proud of you, and you deserve a round of applause. So, Gloria, now I'm going to turn to you. Tell us a little bit about your family.
Hey, everybody. My husband and Tom and I have been together since we're 16, and we're going to be married 47 years. So we had a family of 4 children, and when we were in our 30s, we decided we wanted to foster. And we did want to continue to adopt. We have 3 biological children, an adopted daughter from Korea. So we went on to become foster parents. At this time, we have 18 children that are now all Costellos, and we have 1 little foster baby. when we first started to foster, we were real young and inexperienced, and we were like, oh, I don't know if we can do special needs. Maybe somebody with asthma, maybe somebody with hearing aids. But as we've gone along, we got braver and braver, more experience, and we also learned from our children that they bring more joy to us than, well, I don't want to say than we do to them, but they give us back more than we feel that we give to them. We've learned from them. Our house is so alive, and we're still doing it. And we have children that have mildly affected special needs, cognitive special needs, or severely disabled cognitively and or physically. But as you go along, you gain confidence, and, well, at least we did, and we are more comfortable with more affected children. So.
What has your experience been with Child Protective Services?
I haven't had one-on-one personal experience, but I've had a family that I know, and they don't have anything to do with foster. I mean, they're not involved with foster care. They actually have worked long and hard to try to gain custody of their grandchildren who are being physically abused, and there's domestic violence in the home. So I've watched that for quite a few months, and it seems that there's a lack of communication. I mean, I don't know the laws, and I don't know everything that's happening, but I'm puzzled by the whole thing. It's taking a long time. And then all my siblings, my dad, my daughters, I have a couple of son-in-laws, they're all teachers. And that is one thing they talk a lot about. When they do report, and they sometimes report multiple times, they feel, and it's, again, we don't know the laws, like we don't know what's going on behind the scenes. They just feel that they don't get a lot of response for the children. So those are my only, not personal, but my only experiences.
And what would you say to encourage people to become foster parents?
Well, when we started to think about fostering and we had 4 children, I think what makes a lot of people hesitate is fear of the unknown. So what I did was I used to watch a woman who had children in the same school building when my children were younger, and I would watch her, and I would watch her. She would have different babies and bring them to school, and I just was so interested in what she was doing. And one day I went to her and I introduced myself, and so she became a mentor for me, and she helped me through the process, and it gave me confidence. So I think if you're thinking about it, if there is a way you can build a support system for you and ask questions, I think that was really beneficial for us. And also, it's the unknown, so that's always scary. But you do get an education. Social services has classes, you take them. And also, if you can begin to build a support system for you and your family. I know a lot of people say to me, oh, do you have to be rich? You must be rich. No. You must have a really big house. No, we have a ranch house. So there's a lot of things that people assume. So I would advise, go forward, get educated, and try to find someone that you admire that's doing it. So you can call me. And I'm not kidding. If you can find me or find my phone number from someone, I love to, have you to the house and meet my children and have a talk about it. We need more foster parents.
Thank you.
So good afternoon. Good afternoon. What a special day. What an important day. So when we talk about transformational change, the first step needs to be finding the person or the people who are going to lead us, educate us, instruct us, and inspire us. And it's those with lived experiences, those kids who have suffered, who have cried, who have been in the darkest of dark places, who have hurt, who came through it and who survived. Those are the voices of change, and those are the people who lead us. I am honored to introduce you today to three incredible young people who I am so proud of and inspired by. First, from my Concepts Court, Gianna. So about 3 years ago, we started the Concepts Court here in Suffolk County Family Court, where we bring in young people who are there on JD petitions or PINS petitions who are facing challenges in their life, and we just put a circle around them of love, support, and services. It's inspired the last two letters are the most important. T.S. Terry Smith, a 15-year-old who I met many years ago when I had my felony youth part. He was born in Wyandanch, removed from his mother at the age of 2. She was abusing him. He bounced around among numerous relatives. During that time, he was physically abused, sexually abused, you name it. Wound up starting getting placement after placement after placement. Released to his aunt at the age of 15, where he committed a gunpoint robbery and came to my court. When I got to know him, he was remarkable. He had a smile that lit up the entire room. Talented, he could write music, he could sing. I still play his music in my car. So we worked with him for about 2 years, kept him out of state prison. And he graduated, and we all clapped and tapped our stuff, packed our stuff on the back. We did it, we did it, we did it. We underestimated the trauma. So a couple of years later, at the age of 19, Terry went down to his aunt's basement and took his life. We can never, ever underestimate the destructive nature of trauma. And aftercare is so important. He taught me those lessons. So we created the Concepts Court, and one of our graduates, who I am extremely proud of, is here today, Gianna. And Gianna, when she first came to me, had some challenges in her life. She was in a dark place. Initially, she didn't like me very much, I don't think. But I am so proud of her. I referred her to a great organization called Her Story, where she was encouraged to write about those moments in her life that changed her life. And she wrote this piece, which she has been going around and speaking in public. And I am so proud of her. She's a ray of sunshine. And her grandparents who are here are very, very proud of her as well. You want to just tell her you're here for her because she's a little bit nervous? Gianna, you want to read your story?
Hi. So I named the story Plant Bigger Flowers.
You want to speak a little louder? It's called Plant Bigger Flowers.
Growing up, I felt alone, even though I had a loving family surrounding me. I remember when I felt sad, not knowing who to talk to about my feelings. Do I talk to my grandparents who are in the other room? Do I Skype call my mom in Florida? Do I call my other grandma so I could talk to her and my dad? I did talk to all of them, but it didn't help because I couldn't fully tell them how I feel. How do I tell my parents they're the reason I feel like this? I hated hurting people's feelings, especially my parents, even though that's all they did to me. So I just kept everything to myself, which is what I did with everyone's feelings when they vent to me. My mom convinced me and everyone else that she was ready to be a mom again, so I moved in with her. Boy, did I regret that. I've never had to hide my feelings more than when I entered the 7th grade. I had a semi-healthy friend group. I started to like school and talk to people about how I felt, just a little bit, never too much though. The sixth period bell rang. I got comfortable in class and started to relax and focus on my breathing. The phone rang in my class. They wanted me in the guidance office. My heart felt like it was beating out of my chest. My whole body was shaking with adrenaline. I got to the office unexpectedly fast. I started to walk to my counselor's room, but the secretary told me to stop. I was confused. You're needed in the social worker's office, sweetheart. Social worker? I walked into her office. She smiled unsettlingly. I sat down and she introduced herself. Then she began to tell me that I was there because my friends were worried about me. What? Suddenly it made sense. The lights dimmed, my eyes were watering, my legs and arms felt dead and numb. I knew exactly why I was there, and so did she. She knew I knew what was about to happen, but I was hoping and praying I didn't know. Her words muffled until I heard the dreaded words, "Can you roll up your sleeves for me and flip your arms to your wrists?" Who told on me was all I could think about. My blood was boiling. I slowly walked towards her with my sleeves rolled up, arms gushing blood and dripping on the floor. That was my blood. I couldn't blame it on anyone else. I begged her not to tell my mom in fear of what was going to happen when I got home at 2:45 p.m. At least I had time, or so I thought. But sooner or later, I came face to face, toe to toe with my front door, hearing the footsteps of my mother coming down the stairs. I didn't even have to knock. The door skimmed my nose, and all I saw was my mother's wrinkled forehead and her empty eyes. She smiled at me, gave me a hug, and then said, "You're really my mini-me." What does that even mean? She wasn't mad, she was happy. For the first time ever, I've seen my mother happy about something I did. She was proud of me, finally. I started to crave the feeling of the sharp, cold metal blade ripping open my skin and watching my tan skin turn red every single day. Feeling like this made me feel better, knowing I had scars helped me fight a bigger battle than I could remember, which was putting a smile on my face so my friends and family could be happy. But no matter what, I could never make everyone happy at once. I thought it was my fault, and sometimes when I'm up late at night alone in my thoughts, I still feel like it is my fault. But as I wake up in recovery every morning, I remember the main reason why I felt the need to cut myself open, to make other people feel better. It was because I never wanted anyone to feel alone like I did. So I took mine and everyone else's feelings, wrapped it all up into one tiny blade that made such a big difference. The hardest lesson I've had to learn and teach myself is if people want to plant thorn seedlings in the back of your head, grab the weeds by their root and plant bigger flowers in your own head before you have no more soil to plant them in.
I'm going to put that last line up, a big sign in my office. If people want to plant thorn seedlings in the back of your head, grab the weeds by the root and plant bigger flowers in your own head before you have no more soil to plant them in. I am so proud of you.
Thank you.
So now I want you to meet a self-admitted former gang member and a future movie star. So I learned a lesson a long time ago, Billy. This is Billy Mayorga. I learned a lesson a long time ago by a gang member many years ago told me, "Judge, you don't understand. Not every person in a gang is a bad person. And not every person who's not in the gang is a good person." You know what? That makes a lot of sense. He's also a future movie star. He's, thanks to our friends at Strong and Luis Romero, who's needs to be acknowledged today from Strong Youth, who connected with Billy. Billy got out of that life and got connected with Hollywood. So he's the star in a movie that's coming out in February or March called These Days, based loosely on his life in gangs, and it's based in Brentwood. And he is the star. He's been at the Hamptons Film Festival, the Chelsea Film Festival, San Francisco Film Festival, and he's been nominated as the Best Young Actor. So Billy, you know, you and I have talked, and just tell us about your early childhood.
Good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, my name is Billy Mayorga. I'm a youth leader for Strong Youth, and I wouldn't want to say I'm a former gang member, but I did hang around those type of people, and I was in the streets a lot. But as a kid, my family was always very dysfunctional. My dad was an alcoholic. He was very abusive. And as a kid, like, I can always remember, like, there was never a time I had like a permanent home, and there was never a good time between, like, there was never a good relationship like that I ever seen as a family. Like, I never had like a family bonding type thing. But as a kid, you know, I was always moving around a lot. Like I said, I never had a permanent home. I was put in foster care at the early age of 7 years old because my father made a phone call to CPS as, I guess, to retaliate against my mom. And he made these false accusations saying that she would get drunk, leave us home, or just leave us at home with men, which was obviously not true. But you know, since a kid, I was always in the system. So I already knew.
Billy, what were your experiences in the child protective system once you went into foster care?
It was very scary. It was very traumatic. You know, I've heard a lot of stories today of people who had good outcomes from being in foster care, but in my situation, it wasn't like that. I was put in foster care with this one, her name was Bruni, Miss Bruni. She was already like an elderly lady. She had her own situation going on. She had her own health problems. So in a way, her daughters were like the ones also taking care of us. And it was just very, very like messed up because, like, you know, we were there to, I guess, you know, feel safe and comfortable, but instead we felt the opposite. And yeah, it was very traumatizing.
So at some point, Billy, you told me that you were returned to your mom, and then shortly thereafter, sadly, your mom passed away. You want to tell us about that weekend that you told me about?
Yeah. 2022 in January, my mom had gotten corona, and she ended up in the hospital. Yeah, she was basically gonna pass away, but it was beforehand when she was on life support. I had asked the nurse, and I had asked him, like, you know, don't try to like sugarcoat the situation. Just be straight up with me. Is she gonna make it past this weekend? And he told me no. And yeah.
So you told me about going back to CPS was involved in your life. You told me you had good experiences with CPS caseworkers, but weren't particularly bad experience. And you don't have to don't give me specifics, names, or anything else. Just the attitude that the worker had in terms of talking to you. You were like, how old were you at that point?
It was literally the year after that.
7 or 8?
Yeah. Oh.
What was it about her demeanor?
So it was okay. After my mom passes away, we had to bounce around from, you know, relative to relative, and you know, we were supposed to go with my uncles and stuff. And I remember I had a meeting at, I don't know what the place is called, but I was with my counselor. It was me and my counselor, and off the bat, the lady was just being very confrontational, without knowing the situation or asking me my side of the story. She was just very hostile, you know.
So you told me that at some point when you went out in the streets and you were doing the stuff in the streets, you were very angry. What were you angry about, Billy?
I was just, I guess, angry at the world, at everything. I guess the fact that no one had noticed that something was wrong, and it took for me to, like, speak up, I guess, which I guess I understand, but, like, you know, I had a lot of stuff going on, and it didn't take until I started speaking up for people to realize what was going on in my life.
So what advice would you give to all of us here today who are trying to make a change in the system? What would have helped you when you were little, Billy?
I guess people have to be very, like, open-minded and understand how kids are feeling. You know, you can't just go and throw yourself in the situation, like, thinking that you know everything. Because then, you know, I don't think any kid is willing to disclose what's going on if that's how you're going to approach them.
So, you know what? I'm going to get Billy's autograph later because when he's famous and he's winning an Academy Awards, I'll say, you're still, you're not even 20 yet, Billy.
No, I'm not.
Well, you are. Superhero gets used too often, but you are a superhero.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
So let's move on to a really difficult topic for me. And I speak about this often because I want the word to get out. If you're driving around with your family going out east on a beautiful fall afternoon in the LIE, you look at the hotels and the motels on the side of the road, and every given weekend, dozens and dozens and dozens of little children, 10, 11, 12, are being bought and sold for sex. The commercial sexual exploitation of our children in Suffolk County is a crisis. It is happening right in our neighborhoods, right under our noses. And people don't actually believe it because I think it's just too painful to think about. But I can tell you it's true because I have them in my court. So about 6 months ago, Judge Kreca, Judge Laguercio, Judge Porter, and I started our new errand court. It's, again, these courts that we start is always a memory of somebody because they keep me inspired. It's called the Errand Court. I started the first human trafficking detention court in New York State back in Queens in 2003. And one of the participants was a young woman named Erin. And 6 months she was doing okay. We thought we had her and she was okay. And I come into work one day and I'm told by the social workers are there. They found her frozen to death last night, beaten to death in a Long Island Railroad yard. So I punched the wall, I cursed, screamed, and I almost quit. But I didn't. Because her memory inspires me. So we started this court. And in a short period of time, we're up to, I don't even know, Paul, we're up to 45, Faith, 50 participants. Kids as young as 12. So I brought a really, really remarkable woman. Honored to introduce her to you today. And I was introduced to her through another acknowledgement. Fetty Castillo, who I call my miracle worker at ECLI, I've been working with them for 10 years now, Fetty, and they really do work miracles. But Fetty introduced me to a really, really remarkable young woman who is going to give you a little bit of a glimpse into that life. Alyssa? So, tell us about your childhood, early childhood.
Okay. Hi, everyone. Oh. Okay, so my childhood was challenging. My mom had me, she was pregnant at 15 and had me at 16 years old. So naturally, we kind of grew up together. And she was still living with her mom and, you know, the whole family. So it was about 10 of us in a 2-bedroom apartment. And a lot of them had, you know, friends or, you know, family members, my uncles that were, you know, doing drugs or drinking alcohol, and just probably not the most ideal environment for me. And my mom knew that. She was working really hard to get me out and get her own place. She had 2 jobs, was still going to school, and yeah, she worked so hard to protect me, but our circumstances weren't the best, and I do believe she did not have any resources outside of, you know, her family. Years go by, I become a teenager, and I was definitely a problem for her, a headache for her, and stressing her out. I was an only child for a while with her, and she had a boyfriend and then married him, and I constantly felt like he was trying to separate us in some way, and that's exactly what happened. So by the time I was 14, I think I was 13, and I got into some trouble at the mall with my friends, and that caused me to end up having to go to court and I got an ACOD. But during that time, being problematic with my mom, I ended up on PINS, which led to OCFS, and by 14, I was placed in the first of many group homes.
What were those? Tell us what those group homes are like.
Okay. The group home was an introduction to a completely new life for me.